Warm sheets. A quiet breeze. The faint scent of spirit herbs drifting through the open window. Feng stirred beneath silk blankets, disoriented, his breath shallow as light filtered through the pale curtains. For a moment he wasn't sure where or when he was. He blinked once. The ceiling above him was painted with golden clouds and mounted spirit jade beads that chimed when the wind brushed them. That wasn't right. His old ceiling had cracks and mold. His bed had been straw. This wasn't a servant's room. This was a palace. He sat up quickly. The blanket slipped off his shoulders, revealing robes far too clean and fine for someone like him. His heart pounded. No way. He stood, unsure whether he was still dreaming. His body felt light. Too light. The weight he had carried in his old life, the hunger, the fatigue, the bruises, none of it remained. He walked to the mirror on shaky legs. A younger face stared back at him. 15, maybe 16. Dark eyes. Clear skin. No signs of struggle or scarring. It was his face, but reborn, untouched by pain or labor. That was when he remembered. He had died. Stabbed in the back by a noble cultivator over something petty. The memory flashed like lightning, blood soaking the cold floor, his last thoughts bitter and small. In that moment he had wished not for revenge, but for one quiet life where no one looked down on him. It seemed the world had listened. A knock came at the door. "Young Master Feng, your clothes have been prepared. You are expected in the main hall shortly." Young Master. That title alone nearly sent him spinning. As he dressed, still unsure how to react, something stirred behind his eyes. A ripple like a soft chime echoing through his mind. A voice. System detected. Faded check-in system initializing. Welcome Feng. First check-in point. Azure Sky Clan Ancestral Tablet. Time limit, 6 hours. Feng stood frozen. A system? This really was a second life. He wasn't just reborn, he had a cheat. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his face. "No pressure," he muttered, "just try not to die this time." The outer courtyard was even more overwhelming. Disciples walked in neat rows across polished stone paths, surrounded by flower gardens and spirit trees. Everyone wore the Azure Sky Clan's standard gray robes, their movements disciplined and practiced. His own robes were black, a mark of bloodline status. And because of that, the whispers started immediately. There he is, the useless one. Grandson of the Patriarch, but not even a spark of talent. Didn't he fail to light a single flame stone during last year's exam? Feng kept walking, pretending not to hear. But he heard every word. This body might be new, but some things never changed. It didn't matter. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He had a system. He had time. And he had a check-in to complete. The clan hall sat at the heart of the Azure Sky complex, carved into the base of a low mountain and flanked by 2 stone lions. There, just ahead of the grand steps, stood the ancestral tablet, an obsidian monolith etched with generations of names in glowing silver. As he approached, something inside him stirred. His fingertips tingled. He reached out. The moment his hand touched the stone, a cool breeze swept across his shoulders. Check-in successful. Reward granted. Swift wind step beginner movement technique. Rarity, common grade. Reward integrated. Technique memorized. A pulse of heat moved through his legs. His breathing shifted like he suddenly understood the wind. He took a reflexive step back, and landed 10 feet away, light as a feather. He blinked. "I didn't even try that time." "Well," said a voice from behind him, "you're not as useless as the rumors say." Feng turned. A girl stood by the edge of the courtyard, tall, silver-haired, sword on her back. Her voice was cool and clear, her eyes sharp as tempered steel. Her robe bore the mark of the Frost River sect. Lon. He didn't know how he knew her name, but somehow he did. She looked about his age, though her presence was completely different. Focused. Intense. Dangerous. "I'm still mostly useless," he said, shrugging. Lon narrowed her eyes, then turned without a word and walked away. No further explanation. No greeting. No farewell. "Okay," he whispered, "she's scary?" He didn't notice the man watching from beneath the stone archway, dressed in deep violet robes with long gray hair tied in a single cord. Tauen, the clan's patriarch, stroked his beard with a look that was half disapproval and half pride. The boy had moved like wind. Just for a moment, but that moment said enough. Feng had potential. More than the clan had guessed. Back in his room, Feng sat cross-legged on a meditation mat, staring out at the koi pond below. He watched the water ripple with every breeze. This world was beautiful. But he'd been in beautiful places before. Beauty didn't make life safe. He touched his chest. This body held power. This system gave hope. For once he wasn't starting at zero. He just had to keep moving forward no matter how quietly. A small flame had been lit. Not to burn the world down. Just to warm a life that had once been cold. A quiet chime echoed in his thoughts. New check-in available soon. Next trigger, emotional decision under pressure. He smiled faintly. Guess I'll find out what that means soon enough. And just like that, his second life had begun. The moon hung low that night, silver light bleeding through the paper windows of Li Feng's room. He sat on the floor, arms crossed, trying to meditate. Trying was the key word. Every time he closed his eyes, something distracted him. The hum of spirit bugs outside. The drip of water in the courtyard. The fact that his system had just dropped a bomb on him earlier. Next check-in trigger, emotional decision under pressure. What does that even mean? He muttered, opening his eyes again. He sighed and leaned back on his hands. This body was strong, stronger than it had any right to be, but he could still feel that he was sitting at the very bottom of the mountain. The spirit energy in his meridians was faint. His veins were open but not yet shaped. It was like having a jug with a hole at the bottom. Whatever power he gathered now would leak right through. But there was one thing he couldn't stop thinking about. That wind step from earlier. It hadn't felt like a technique someone had taught him. It had felt natural, like taking a breath. And ever since, he'd had a strange sense in his limbs. Like they were listening. He looked at his hand. System, he whispered. Do I have a Tao body? There was no sound. No fanfare. But then, a faint glow appeared on the floor in front of him. An ethereal screen that only he could see. Scanning. Confirmed. Primordial Tao body. Type. Adaptive. Grade. Unknown. Effect. Can absorb, learn, or harmonize with any Tao under observation. Risk. Overexposure may result in body fatigue or spiritual backlash. Note. This body is classified as 1 in 10,000 generations. Concealment recommended. Li Feng blinked, staring at the words. He read them again. And then again. Primordial. Tao body. He fell silent. In his last life, he'd overheard cultivators speak of rare physiques. Heavenly fire veins, storm eyes, star root bones. All legendary. But a primordial Tao body? That was something pulled from old myths. Something supposedly lost to history. Now he had one. And the system wanted him to keep it hidden. Which made sense. In this world, the rarest things were the most hunted. Greed grew faster than talent. He'd seen it happen. He died because of it. A knock came at the outer door. Li Feng, a voice called. You awake. He scrambled to his feet and shoved the screen away with a swipe. The glow vanished. The door slid open and a messy-haired boy stumbled in, arms full of what looked like jars and bamboo tubes. The boy looked about 17, robe stained with powder and soot. A round face, wide smile, and eyes full of mischief. Tao Zhen, the boy said, offering a grin. New to the compound. They stuck me in the alchemy hall. I may or may not have caused a minor explosion. You didn't feel that shaking earlier, did you? Li Feng blinked. That was you. Technically it was the cauldron, Tao Zhen replied. But the cauldron was following my recipe. Which, for the record, was brilliant in theory. He walked straight into the room and dropped his bags by the corner without waiting for permission. I brought snacks, he said, pulling out a box of steamed buns. Thought I'd meet the famous young master. Li Feng narrowed his eyes. You mean the infamous one? Zhen shrugged. Close enough. He handed Li Feng a bun and dropped to the floor with a loud exhale. So, he said, mouth half full, are the rumors true? Li Feng raised an eyebrow. Which ones? Zhen pointed at him. That you're the only bloodline heir who never awakened spirit flame. That you failed your first 3 tests. That even your own cousin calls you dead weight. Li Feng stared. Zhen chewed slowly. You're really bad at making friends, Li Feng muttered. Zhen grinned. And you're terrible at hiding that you're not useless. Li Feng froze. Zhen leaned forward. I watched you this morning. You moved 10 feet without sound. That's not something a trash cultivator does. And you didn't even look surprised when it happened. Li Feng glanced at the window. Silence stretched between them. Zhen finally sat back. Don't worry. I don't care what you're hiding. Everyone in this clan is hiding something. But if you ever need help mixing a smoke bomb or an explosive pill, I'm your guy. He stood, brushing crumbs off his lap. Good night, mystery man. He was gone before Li Feng could respond. Later that night, Li Feng stood under the moon. He looked at his palm again, remembering the movement technique, the scan results, and the feeling in his chest, like a quiet echo just waiting to be answered. He hadn't decided what path he would walk yet. But he knew this much. He couldn't waste this life. Not again. A soft chime sounded in his head. System notification. New objective. Location, Clan Inner Garden Spirit Vine Ring. Trigger, emotional strain or pressure. Reward, mid-tier spiritual sensing technique. Timer, 24 hours. He took a breath and turned toward the garden path. Moonlight followed his steps. He had no master. No guidance. No certainty. But he had his body. He had his system. And tonight he would take his first step toward truly cultivating. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge when Feng arrived at the inner garden. Mist clung to the trees like a dream not ready to end, and pale blue spirit vines swayed lightly around a small ring-shaped formation of stone paths. The spirit vine ring was where low-tier disciples practiced their breathing arts and spirit channeling techniques. He'd passed it in silence once before. Today it was full. More than 20 outer sect disciples were already there, kneeling in quiet meditation. Some sat perfectly still. Others whispered to themselves or stared into the mist like it held secrets only they could see. He could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was trying to impress the elders. It was the first day of the new month, which meant one thing. Internal selection trials were coming. Every year, the Azure Sky clan picked the top outer sect disciples to join the inner court. For most, it was a dream. For the rest, it was a nightmare. Feng walked along the edge of the formation. A few heads turned. Then the whispers began. Why is he here? That's the Patriarch's grandson, right? I thought he gave up cultivating years ago. Maybe he's just trying to breathe the same air as us. A few of them laughed, quiet but sharp. Feng ignored them and sat near the far side of the garden. He'd already gotten used to those looks. In 2 days of being here, he'd heard a dozen different versions of the same story. He had no talent, no future, and no business being in the same clan as the true geniuses. But none of them knew about his body. And none of them could see the faint golden screen that appeared in front of his eyes when he sat down. System check-in trigger detected. Location confirmed. Spirit Vine Ring. Condition met. Emotional pressure. Check-in successful. Reward unlocked. Technique, sense thread flow, beginner spirit sense. Feng blinked as the knowledge slipped into his thoughts. It was subtle, less a technique and more a change in how he felt the world. The warmth in the garden became clearer. The flow of the vine's energy tickled his skin. Even the breath of the boy 3 spots to his left felt like a brushstroke across his shoulder. It wasn't power exactly, but it was awareness. He didn't realize he'd closed his eyes until a voice cut through the air. You. Move. Feng opened his eyes. A boy stood over him, tall, broad-shouldered, with short dark hair and a sharp, square jaw. His red-trimmed robe marked him as an inner court disciple. His voice carried the lazy authority of someone used to obedience. I said move. That's my spot. Feng stayed seated. I got here first, he said calmly. The boy's expression didn't change. But the tension in the air did. Someone whispered, that's Jin Mu. Jin Mu. A name Feng recognized even from his previous life's rumors. A fire-style prodigy from the main branch family. 3rd generation. Known for brutal duels and short patience. Feng stood slowly trying to de-escalate. There's plenty of space. Jin Mu stepped forward and slapped the side of his shoulder. It wasn't full strength, but Feng staggered. He looked up. Jin Mu's eyes glinted like embers. I don't care what family you came from, the older boy said. You're just a hollow name. Trash in black silk. The air had grown still. Then another voice spoke from behind the vines. That's enough. Lan stepped into view, her long silver hair catching the early light. She wore a plain training robe, her sword across her back. Her tone was flat, disinterested. But the garden went quiet anyway. Jin Mu turned. What? You siding with him? Lan shrugged. No. I just hate noisy dogs. Jin Mu's eyes narrowed, but Lan was already walking past. As she moved by Feng, she paused for only half a breath. Don't give him an excuse, she said quietly. Feng exhaled slowly. Jin Mu turned without another word and stormed off. The whispers returned, now sharper, confused, even more curious. Feng sat back down. His hand trembled for a moment, then steadied. He didn't feel brave. He didn't feel strong. But his chest burned with a strange heat. It wasn't rage. It was hunger. For once in his life he wanted to stand. Not hide. Not beg. Stand. A few minutes later, the disciples dispersed. But Li Feng remained. His breathing slowed. The spirit energy around the garden pulsed softly, like music beneath the surface of the earth. And now, thanks to sense thread flow, he could feel it. Even if just barely. Later that afternoon, back in his room, Zhen was already waiting. The alchemist had moved in without asking, spread scrolls across the floor, and was now trying to measure out a mixture using a bent spoon and a teacup. Rough morning? Zhen asked without looking up. Li Feng sat down next to the pile of scrolls. I met Jin Mu. Zhen snorted. Let me guess. He called you trash and tried to push you around? Li Feng nodded. Zhen poured some powder into a jade bowl and grinned. Classic Mu. He picks a new target every month. Don't take it personally. He's just insecure. Insecure? Zhen looked at him sideways. He's stuck. He hasn't broken through to the next stage in months. Everyone expects him to lead the new wave of disciples. You're the perfect scapegoat. Easy target. No one will defend you. Li Feng thought about Lan's voice. Her cold, clipped words. Maybe not no one. Zhen stirred the powder carefully, then dumped it into a small clay pot. A puff of smoke filled the air. Li Feng coughed. What is that? Zhen grinned. Painkiller pill. Probably. Maybe. You're gonna need it. Li Feng watched the smoke drift toward the ceiling and settle into the corners of the room. His head still buzzed with the feeling of the garden, the system, the fight that almost happened. The whispers. The strength he hadn't yet shown. The check-in reward had helped. But it wasn't enough. He wasn't here to survive. Not anymore. He was here to climb. One step at a time. The rain came quietly that night. Not a storm. Not even a drizzle. Just a soft tapping against the tiled rooftop, steady and distant. Li Feng sat cross-legged beneath the open eaves of his small courtyard, letting the cold air brush his skin. The scent of wet stone and moss filled his nose. He'd never had a courtyard of his own before. It was still hard to believe this quiet space belonged to him now. Inside the room, Zhen was snoring. The alchemist had passed out in a pile of scrolls, his latest batch of probably safe pills cooling on the windowsill. Li Feng didn't feel like sleeping. His mind was still wrapped around the words he'd read that evening. The system had granted him the swift wind-step technique when he first checked in at the ancestral tablet. At the time, the knowledge had embedded itself directly into his body, and he had moved without thinking. But now that he had a moment of peace, he'd opened the scroll the system had included, an actual written copy, now stored in his mind like a perfectly preserved memory. It was nothing fancy. Just 6 short passages. Simple phrases paired with breathing instructions and stances. But when he read the first line aloud, it hit him like a gust of wind. The wind moves not with weight but with memory. Step only where you forget your fear. He read the line again. And again. He stood slowly, letting his bare feet settle against the damp stone. The first movement was subtle. Step forward, shift your weight to your left foot, breathe in through the nose, center your core. He tried it. His heel caught on the stone and slipped slightly. Again. Breathe in. Step. Let go. His body didn't fight the motion, but it didn't follow easily either. He was light now, yes, but not balanced. The wind didn't trust him yet. He ran through the full sequence 3 more times. His muscles were steady but dull. Like an instrument out of tune. His body remembered servitude, hunger, quiet pain. Not cultivation. He was going to have to retrain it. He stepped back again, reset his stance, and moved. This time the shift was smoother. Not fast. Not graceful. But real. For the first time he felt the motion not as a trick but as a rhythm. And in that rhythm, something stirred deep in his chest. Not energy. Not magic. Just breath. His breath. And with it, a thread of quiet power. Faint. Fragile. But his. He exhaled and dropped back into a seated position, heart beating faster than it should have been. Not from exertion. From joy. He smiled to himself. I can really do this. The next morning the garden was wet and silent. Most of the disciples were still asleep. The rain had driven the more diligent ones inside. But Li Feng was already back at the spirit vine ring. He stood quietly near the outer rim, practicing his steps. Forward. Pause. Slide. Each time he moved, the flow came easier. The balance steadier. He was still slow, but steady. He repeated the same loop for half an hour before someone finally called out from behind. You're doing it wrong. He turned. Lan stood on the path, arms crossed, watching him with her usual detached stare. You're wasting too much energy in the pivot. Your left foot drags. Li Feng blinked. You've been watching me this whole time? No, she said flatly. I was here first. He looked at the dirt. She was right. Her footprints were older than his. Lon walked forward and stopped beside him. She drew a line in the mud with the tip of her toe. Wind-based techniques don't rely on force. They rely on weight shift. The moment your shoulder dips, your movement breaks. She demonstrated. Her body barely moved, but her weight slid cleanly across the ground, like a leaf gliding on water. She didn't even stir the mist beneath her step. Feng nodded, watching carefully. You studied wind cultivation? I studied sword movement, she said. But sword footwork starts with wind. She stepped back, turned, and added, You're not bad. For someone who's supposed to be trash. Feng smiled faintly. You keep calling me that. I'm not the one who wrote the rumors. He moved through the step again. This time his pivot was cleaner. Lon tilted her head. Better. She turned and walked away. No praise. No smile. Just facts. But her words lingered longer than they should have. Better. That evening, back in the room, Zhen was grinding a stone herb into powder when he noticed something odd. Feng, he said without looking up, why is your breathing different? Feng looked up from his stance training. Is it? You're quieter, Zhen said. More focused. You've been stepping around the room like a squirrel on a mission. Feng didn't reply. He simply moved again. The arc of his foot was smoother now. His center didn't shift too early. His core remained grounded. He could feel the wind now, not as air but as rhythm. Zhen scratched his head. You're actually cultivating, aren't you? Feng finally looked at him. A little. Zhen grinned and tossed a pouch toward him. Here. Have some recovery powder. Might taste like dirt, but it helps. Feng caught it. The pouch was warm. He smiled. I'll take dirt if it helps me keep moving. That night, while Zhen snored and the coals in the brazier burned low, Feng stood at the window, moving through the wind step again. And for the first time the wind answered back. It didn't carry him. Not yet. But it watched. And waiting was almost the same as recognition. The next morning began with knocking. Sharp, persistent, and far too early. Feng sat up groggily, still wrapped in a blanket, as Tauen rolled off his own bedroll with a groan and muttered something about alchemy, deadlines, and exploding herbs. The knocking didn't stop. Coming? Feng called out. When he opened the door, a young girl in outer sect robes stood with a scroll in hand. She barely looked up before reciting in a dry voice. Young Master Feng, the clan attendant hall has summoned you for ceremonial service duty. You are to appear within the hour. Formal robe required. Do not be late. She handed him the scroll and left without waiting for acknowledgement. Feng blinked. Ceremonial service? He unrolled the scroll. It was official. Sealed with the clan's jade stamp. Today, the inner court elders were receiving visiting dignitaries from the Snow River sect. And apparently, the lowest-ranked core descendant, him, was being assigned to serve tea during the meeting. He stared at the scroll. Zhen leaned out from behind the doorframe, bun in hand. What's the face for? I have to serve tea, Feng said as if the words were in another language. Zhen nodded solemnly. Ah, the ceremonial humiliation. What? It's tradition. They always make the most useless bloodline members serve tea at the annual meeting. Keeps the guests entertained. You're basically background furniture with a heartbeat. Feng stared at him. Zhen smiled. Good luck. The ceremonial hall was all white marble and shadowed pillars, with spirit lamps glowing faintly along the ceiling. The air was filled with the scent of incense and polished pine. Feng stood behind the side table, gripping the tea tray with both hands. His formal robe itched. The sleeves were too long. The collar didn't sit right. And the tiny jade teapot in front of him looked like it cost more than every set of clothes he'd ever owned in his past life. The elders filed in first, dozens of them in layered robes and silver headpieces, chatting softly with one another as they took their places in a circle. Then came the guests. The Snow River sect wore silver and blue robes, each one trimmed with icy white fur. Their leading elder walked with the steady chill of someone used to being obeyed. And trailing behind them was her, Lon. She walked with her hands tucked behind her back, sword slung across her back, head held high. Her expression was as calm as always, but her eyes flicked to Feng the moment she entered. She paused for half a second, and then kept walking. Feng looked down at the tray again. Just serve the tea. How hard could it be? It started fine. He served the first few elders without incident. Poured smoothly. Bowed with practiced form. No spills. But then, halfway through the inner ring, he reached the section where Elder Mu sat, a sharp-eyed man known for his constant disapproval of Feng's existence. And unfortunately, he was seated directly beside one of the Snow River sect's elders. Feng approached, heart steady. He bowed. "Honored elders. Your tea." As he poured, Elder Mu shifted slightly, knocking into the tray. The tray wobbled. Feng adjusted. But the teapot slipped. A tiny splash hit the elder's sleeve. A pause fell across the room. The elder frowned and slowly looked down at the damp fabric. Feng's blood ran cold. He bowed deeply. "My deepest apologies." The elder didn't speak. But Elder Mu did. "This is why we do not waste jade robes on children who can't even handle tea," he said, his voice loud enough for the room to hear. Several elders chuckled quietly. One of the Snow River sect disciples leaned over and whispered something behind a fan. The humiliation burned through Feng's ears like fire. He clenched the tray tighter. Do nothing and they'd confirm the rumor. Speak up and he'd be called disrespectful. But before he could decide, another voice cut through the air. "I've seen worse tea spills," said Leong casually. "Zhen once poured spirit wine into a cultivation cauldron by mistake." All eyes turned to her. She sipped her tea unfazed. "And it exploded," she added. The room laughed. Even the stern elder with the wet sleeve cracked a smile. The moment passed. Feng returned to the serving table with quiet steps and a pounding heart. Lan didn't look at him again. But her words had broken the tension. Later, when the guests had left and the elders filed out, Feng remained behind to help gather the cups. He was stacking trays when a voice called out from the doorway. "Your pivot was clean," Lan said. He looked up. She was alone, leaning against the archway. "I saw you adjust when the tray slipped. You're improving." Feng blinked. "That's a strange way to say, you spilled tea on an elder." "You only spilled a drop," she said. "Most would have dropped the whole tray." He hesitated. "Why did you defend me?" Lan didn't answer immediately. Then simply, "Because your footing was right. That means you're trying." She turned and walked away, sword tapping softly against the stone floor. That night, back in the courtyard, Zhen was trying to coax a pill into solidifying without exploding. Feng stood at the edge of the koi pond, watching the ripples as moonlight spilled across the surface. The tea had been hot. The laughter had burned. But he hadn't been shaken. Not this time. The system hadn't triggered a reward. But that didn't matter. He'd passed a different kind of trial today. Not with force. Not with talent. But with patience. He whispered to the pond as if someone might be listening. "I'll keep going. Even if I'm just furniture for now." The wind stirred the trees in quiet reply. The duel wasn't supposed to happen. Feng had planned to spend the morning quietly, maybe visit the outer sect training field and practice wind-step footwork along the river path. That was the plan. Instead, he was standing in the middle of the outer sect sparring platform, surrounded by 24 disciples. Half of them were cheering. The other half were waiting for him to fall. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I said I wasn't here to fight," he muttered. The boy across from him grinned with full confidence. He was taller, broader, and clearly comfortable being the center of attention. "Too bad," said the boy, cracking his knuckles. "I was planning to beat someone today. You just made it easy." His name was Bai Yun, a mid-tier outer disciple who had recently entered the core path realm, the second major stage of cultivation. He was known for his fire-based martial arts and big mouth. Apparently both were dangerous. A few hours earlier, Feng had walked into the sparring field just to observe. But Bai Yun had been boasting about his strength, daring anyone from the audience to step up. And when no one did, his attention had shifted. Right to Feng. "Didn't know trash was allowed to watch from the edge," he'd said. "Shouldn't you be back polishing the elders' floors?" Feng had ignored him. That only made it worse. Soon there were calls for a spar. Then taunts. Then peer pressure. And now here he was. Shoeless, unarmed, standing on stone with 20 pairs of eyes watching. One pair belonged to Tauen, who was biting into a dried fruit pastry with mild panic. Another pair belonged to Lan, who had shown up without a word and stood near the back of the crowd, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Don't worry," Bai Yun called, waving to the crowd. "I'll go easy. I'd hate to send a clan heir to the medical hall over a little sparring match." The crowd laughed. Feng stayed still. The platform was circular, 50 feet across. The elders who usually monitored it were absent today. It wasn't an official match, just friendly competition, as the outer sect called it. He could back out. No one would blame him for refusing. But he didn't move, because something deep inside him had finally started to rise. A quiet part. One that remembered what it felt like to bow, to kneel, to beg. And it didn't want to do that anymore. He looked up. "I accept," Feng said quietly. The crowd hushed for a moment. Then Yun grinned. "Didn't expect that. All right then. Let's begin." He stepped forward and lifted both arms, fire gathering around his fists like glowing mist. Fire palm strike. The moment the name left his lips, his hands ignited. He charged. Fast. Focused. His core strength wasn't weak. He trained well and his strikes were real. Feng exhaled slowly and moved. The world slowed, not because of power but because of clarity. His feet stepped lightly just as the wind step had taught him. His core shifted at the right moment. His breath matched the wind. He pivoted left. Yun's flaming fist flew past his shoulder, missing by inches. Feng's hand snapped forward, striking the side of the older boy's ribs. A clean, simple palm. Not strong. Not flashy. But perfectly placed. The hit landed. Yun stumbled a step. He blinked. Then he growled and turned again. Feng didn't wait. He stepped forward, 1-2 slide and dropped low, sweeping Yun's legs. The older boy collapsed backward with a grunt. The crowd gasped. He rolled to his feet, more furious than hurt, flames bursting up both arms now. "You think that's enough? I'm not done." He slammed his fists together. Twin flame arc. 2 arcs of fire curved outward and launched at Feng like blazing whips. Feng moved again. His foot twisted. Wind gathered at his side. He ducked under the first flame arc. The second came faster, slashing toward his chest. He reached out without thinking, drawing on the system's earliest reward, the instinctive familiarity with the technique. Wind gathered. Swift wind step, arc shift. His body twisted with the air, slipping past the flame by a hair's breadth. The wind carried him behind Yun in a single smooth motion. Before the older boy could turn, Feng tapped the center of his back with a flat palm. Yun froze. And fell forward. Face first into the dirt. Silence fell over the platform. The crowd was stunned. No one moved. Tauen choked on his pastry and nearly fell over. Did he just? Lan blinked once. Then turned and walked away. Feng stood where he was, breathing calmly. He hadn't used strength. He hadn't even attacked. He had simply moved. Yun groaned, rolling onto his side. The duel was over. No one called it. No one declared a winner. But they all knew. Feng stepped off the platform without a word. He didn't look back. But in the corners of the crowd, something had changed. The whispers were different now. "Did you see that step? Was that a real technique? I thought he couldn't cultivate." He kept walking, wind brushing his hair back. One step at a time. That night the system responded. System notification. Condition met, pressure under combat. Check-in unlocked. Reward granted, wind echo pulse. Type, beginner enhancement. Effect, increases sensitivity to movement and timing for a short duration. Feng sat beneath the moonlight, watching the new technique sink into his thoughts. His body was still sore. His hands trembled slightly from adrenaline. But inside something was growing. Not arrogance. Not pride. Just a small seed of belief. That maybe, just maybe, he could walk this path. It started with a sound. A faint rustle. Like silk brushing against the floor. Then a soft tap 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 on the wooden frame of the window. Feng rolled over in his sleep. Another tap. Then something small landed on his stomach with a dull whump. He groaned and sat up, hair a mess, blinking into the darkness of his room. Moonlight poured through the open window, cool and clean, but the shadows felt strange tonight. Then he saw it. At the edge of his bed, curled up like a smug little thief, was a tiny creature. A fox. Or at least, mostly a fox. It had shimmering white fur, a pair of twitching ears, and 9 tails curled neatly around its body. Its paws rested on one of his folded robes like it had claimed it for itself. Its eyes, bright gold with slitted pupils, watched him lazily. Feng stared. The fox yawned. "Not a dream," he muttered. It blinked at him. Then spoke. "You sleep too much." Feng didn't scream. He'd learned in this life and the last, that screaming only made strange situations worse. Instead he said the first thing that came to mind. "You talk." "Yes," the fox said. "You don't." It stood, arched its back in a stretch, and jumped down from the bed with feline grace. "Took you long enough to notice me. I've been watching since the garden trial." Feng rubbed his eyes. "Why?" "You're interesting," the fox said. He paused. "That's not reassuring." The fox sat on the floor and began grooming one paw. I can smell your bloodline. And something else. You're not normal. I like that. You broke into my room. I invited myself. Li Feng sighed and leaned back against the bed frame. Who, or what, are you exactly? The fox looked up with a glint of amusement. I'm Jean. That doesn't answer the question. I'm a companion spirit. Well, I was one a long time ago. My old master died. Got eaten by a mountain. Don't ask. Li Feng stared at her. Jean shrugged with her tiny fox shoulders. Now I'm free. I drifted for a while. Then I smelled your Tao body. Primordial, right? Li Feng's pulse skipped. How do you know about that? I know a lot of things. You're like a walking feast of raw potential. It's annoying, but interesting. She stood and flicked her tail. So I decided to stick around. Li Feng squinted at her. You can't just pick a master. I didn't say you were my master. Then what are you? She smirked. I'm your guide. Your shadow. Your occasional voice of reason when you're being dumb. And if you give me snacks, I might save your life. That's a lot of conditions. I'm flexible. She wandered over to his shelf, poked at a scroll, and then curled up beside a half-finished energy pill Tauen had left out. She murmured. This alchemist you live with has terrible technique. Don't eat that, Li Feng warned. She sniffed it. Wasn't planning to. It smells like regret. Li Feng leaned his head back against the wall. A talking fox. A self-proclaimed spirit guide. A system that handed out cultivation techniques like secret fortune cookies. What had his life become? Jean yawned again and curled her tails over her face. I'll nap here tonight, she said. The spiritual energy in this room is warm. Don't steal anything. I'm too proud to steal. I take things with style. She was asleep before he could argue. The next morning, Tauen stepped into the room carrying a steaming pot of tea and nearly dropped it when he saw the fox on the windowsill. Why is there a small animal in your room? She lives here now, Li Feng said. Jean pointed at her. That's a spirit beast. Do you know how rare that is? Wait, does she talk? Can she cook? Will she teach me lightning arts? Jean didn't even lift her head. I don't cook, she said muffled. But I do electrocute. Jean set the tea down very carefully. Li Feng stood and stretched. I need to train, he said. There's a chance the elders might inspect outer sect progress next week. You planning to show off? Jean asked. No. Just trying not to be a joke. Jean uncurled and leapt to the floor. You'll need more than wind step and sharp reflexes if you want to survive a real fight. Li Feng looked at her. She grinned. Come on then. Time for your first real lesson. Lesson. She walked to the courtyard. I'm going to teach you how to dodge like someone who doesn't want to die. Jean blinked. Wait. Can I watch? Jean flicked her tail. Only if you bring dried fish snacks. And just like that, the fox spirit, the alchemist, and the reborn grandson of the most powerful clan in the land stepped out into the morning light together. One determined. One distracted. One just hungry. But the first true day of training had begun. The eastern gate of the Azure Sky clan was rarely quiet. Traders came through in the mornings, hauling crates of spirit wood or carting dusty sacks of low-grade ores. Outer sect disciples passed by on their way to the mountain paths for field tasks. Occasionally, a merchant from a nearby town would stop and gawk at the gate carvings before being shooed away by a bored guard. But today, as Li Feng stepped beneath the arch, the wind shifted. It wasn't loud. It didn't howl or scream. It simply whispered, across the skin, through the robes, behind the ears. Jean, perched on his shoulder in her smallest form, lifted her head. You feel that? She said. Yeah, Li Feng replied. It felt like pressure. Not heavy. Not threatening. Just aware. He paused in the center of the gate path, where the stone tiles turned slightly darker, where the elders claimed a battle had once been fought between two clan founders hundreds of years ago. The system responded. System check-in triggered. Location: Azure Sky Clan East Gate Arch. Condition met. Tao body aligned with natural flow. Check-in successful. Reward unlocked. Technique: flow pulse listening. Type: sensory art. Effect: enhances perception of movement and spiritual fluctuations in a 10-meter radius. Duration: short bursts, grows stronger with practice. Li Feng inhaled. The moment the words settled into his thoughts, his surroundings shifted. Not literally. Not with his eyes. But with something deeper. The sound of footsteps became clearer. The sway of branches on distant trees painted faint patterns in his mind. Even the breath of the guard standing 30 paces away became a pulsing note. It wasn't just hearing. It was sensing rhythm. Looks like a passive technique, Jean said, her tail flicking thoughtfully. Low energy cost. Good for defense or ambush detection. Li Feng nodded, eyes closed. I can feel the birds behind the far wall. 4 of them. Jean blinked. What kind? He opened his eyes. Sparrows. She snorted. Beginner luck. He smiled faintly. The sensation faded, but the outline of it lingered in his thoughts. Like the memory of a song he hadn't known he'd heard before. Flow pulse listening wasn't an attack. It wasn't flashy. But it made the world louder, even in silence. That, to him, felt powerful. As he turned to leave the gate, one of the guards stopped him with a raised hand. You. Li Feng paused. The guard tilted his head. You're the Patriarch's grandson, right? Li Feng gave a polite nod. I saw what you did in the duel the other day, the guard said. The fire won by Yun? Never seen him so red in the face. Li Feng didn't reply. The guard grinned. About time someone gave him a bruise he couldn't hide. Li Feng bowed slightly. It was just a spar. Sure it was. The guard leaned back on his halberd. But words gotten around. He let the sentence hang there like a fishing line in still water. Li Feng kept his expression calm, though his heart ticked a little faster. Word had gotten around. Not just about the duel. About him. Back at the training field, Zhen was trying to coax a fire from a soaked pill manual. He tossed it into a clay brazier and muttered something about humidity and spiritual ink smearing. Li Feng arrived to find the entire practice field reeking of singed cinnamon. Zhen turned. You went to the gate? Just walking, Li Feng said. Sure, Zhen replied. You've got that post-check-in glow. Glow? Spiritual awareness. You're standing differently. Li Feng blinked. You can tell that? I watch people's breathing. You take cleaner steps when your chi aligns with your pulse. Also, your eyes look like you just smelled lightning. Jean appeared behind Zhen, lounging on the wall. He's sharper than he looks. Zhen startled. How do you sneak up like that? I'm quiet. You're glowing. You literally shimmer. Jean tilted her head proudly. Elegance cannot be silenced. Li Feng chuckled. I got a new sensing technique. Let me guess, Zhen said. Flow something? Wind-sounding name? Flow pulse listening. Nice. Good for forest walks and catching people lying. Li Feng raised an eyebrow. Zhen continued casually, you'd be surprised how much spirit energy shifts when someone's trying to fake calm. He pulled a notebook from under the brazier. You keep stacking these skills and soon the elders won't know where to put you. Jean nodded. He should start thinking about hiding that progress. Or balancing it. Li Feng looked at her. You mean hold back? I mean be smart, Jean said. Right now you're still below the radar. Stay there. Li Feng looked up at the clouds. A few passing disciples walked by, talking about the upcoming sect trials. Their voices were light, but there was tension beneath them. Everyone was training harder. Preparing. Positioning. The world wasn't moving fast, but it was shifting. And it was watching. That night, as Li Feng practiced flow pulse listening in the courtyard, the wind shifted again. This time it carried a whisper not from the system, but from instinct. Strength wasn't always in power. Sometimes it was in knowing when to move, and when to wait. He opened his eyes, standing still in the darkness, his senses expanded. The night breathed with him. He didn't need to shine yet. But the ground beneath him knew. He was no longer just walking. He was learning how to listen. Li Feng had learned 3 things about alchemy from Tauen. 1. Fire is optional. 2. Explosions are not. 3. If it smells like honey and sulfur, run. He stood now in the middle of Zhen's half-claimed corner of the courtyard, arms crossed, watching as Zhen fumbled with a smoking gourd, muttering words that sounded vaguely like apology spells. This is going to work, Zhen said confidently, just before the pot began to hiss. Li Feng took a step back. You said that last time, he said. And the roof almost caught fire. That was because I didn't add the cooling seal fast enough. This time I have the seal. Li Feng gestured at the paper talisman clinging weakly to the side of the cauldron with what looked like steamed rice. That's not a seal. That's breakfast. Zhen squinted. It's multi-purpose. Jean sat on the rooftop above them, curled into a tight ball, watching the proceedings like a judge at a particularly reckless cooking contest. If the cauldron glows, she called down, you should probably leave. It's not going to glow, Zhen said. The cauldron glowed. Li Feng moved instinctively, sweeping his arm around to pull Zhen back just as the pot shook once, twice, then exploded in a puff of green mist. The explosion wasn't large. It was worse. It was sticky. A wave of syrupy green vapor poured out, coating everything in the courtyard with a shimmering sheen that smelled vaguely like mint and mushrooms. Birds scattered from nearby trees. Jean vanished in a flash of light, reappearing on the far wall with narrowed eyes. Zhen coughed violently, his hair now sticking straight up. Okay, he wheezed. So it might have been the rice. Li Feng wiped mist from his face, blinking through the residue. What was that supposed to be? A calming pill, Zhen said. For stress relief. I feel stressed, Li Feng muttered. The sticky mist clung to the training mats, the bamboo poles, and even the nearby vines that lined the walls. It was everywhere. Jean sniffed the air once and made a face. That was a beast sedative, she said. Badly mixed. Zhen tilted his head. That explains the numbness in my tongue. Li Feng was about to say something else when a new voice entered the courtyard. It was calm, authoritative, and not amused. What in the name of the 8 venerable heavens is going on here? The 3 of them turned as one. An elder stood at the gate, long robes the color of polished bronze, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes cold and sharp as the edge of a frost blade. His beard was trimmed to a perfect point, and his presence was like stepping into a silent storm. Elder Miao, master of the outer sect's disciplinary hall. Li Feng straightened immediately. Zhen tried to bow and nearly slipped in the green goo. Elder Miao's eyes swept across the scene, the glowing cauldron fragments, the green-stained floor, the fox on the wall. Report, he said. Zhen opened his mouth, closed it, then pointed at the cauldron. Stress pill. Miao's brow lifted slightly. You attempted to craft a Class 3 calming pill using an unsealed stove and what appears to be rice glue? I can explain. You can stop, Miao said. He stepped closer, hands still behind his back, examining the residue now bubbling gently along the edges of the stone floor. This formula is unstable, he said. I haven't seen this type of spiritual reaction since the Southern Trial disaster. You've contaminated 3 cultivation lanes and affected 4 trees with spirit pulse roots. Li Feng's eyes widened. The vines? They're absorbing the vapor, Miao said. Which means we'll have mutated spirit herbs sprouting within the week. Zhen paled. I'm willing to replant them. You will. But first. The elder turned to Li Feng. What's your part in this? I was watching, Li Feng said honestly. Miao studied him for a long moment. Then to everyone's surprise he gave a small nod. Good, he said. You didn't run. That's a kind of bravery. Zhen blinked. Wait, what? You're impulsive, Miao said, turning to Zhen. But not malicious. Still, you will spend the next 3 mornings tending the outer gardens. If another incident occurs, you'll lose your pill license for the season. Zhen nodded quickly. Yes, elder. Miao looked at Jean. And you? Jean blinked. I'm a fox. He gave her a long stare, then looked away without another word. Before leaving, he stopped beside Li Feng again. You handled that well. And you've been quiet since the duel. That's wise. But keep your balance. Strength makes noise whether you want it to or not. He left without waiting for a response. The courtyard was silent for a long moment after. Zhen slumped to the ground. I think I just got complimented and sentenced at the same time. Li Feng looked at the vines along the wall. They were glowing faintly now, pulsing with a strange green hue. I think you gave them feelings, Jean said. Zhen groaned. That evening, Li Feng sat on the edge of the pond, watching the mist drift away on the surface of the water. He hadn't done much, but he hadn't panicked, and for some reason that mattered. The elders were watching, not just the sect. His name had always been at the bottom, but little by little, it was starting to rise. Not by force, not by noise, but by presence. The sword garden was silent. Even the wind moved differently here. Tall white trees lined the edges of the stone path, each one carved with shallow grooves that shimmered faintly under the light. The ground was flat, flawless. No leaves ever seemed to fall. No birds sang. It was the kind of silence that made Li Feng feel like an intruder. He paused at the threshold, holding his breath as his foot crossed onto the outer stone ring. The sword garden was a restricted space. Only inner court disciples were allowed inside. Only those who walked the way of the sword. He wasn't either of those things. But he wasn't here to train. He was here because Lan had sent a note. Come. No questions. Li Feng had stared at it for half an hour before deciding that Yes, it was definitely written in her handwriting. And no, it wasn't a joke. Now here he was, waiting in the most dangerous garden in the clan. He wasn't sure what worried him more, being caught by a patrolling elder, or disappointing the girl who once blocked a flame strike with the flat of her blade like it was a leaf on her shoulder. Then he saw her. Standing at the center of the garden, sword in hand, back straight, eyes closed. Leong. She didn't acknowledge him as he stepped forward. Her hair swayed slightly in the wind, tied back in a silver ribbon. Her blade, long, narrow, flawless, rested against her palm, edge facing up. Feng stopped a few paces away. "You wanted to see me?" She opened her eyes slowly. "I'm going to attack you," she said. Feng blinked. "What?" Leong raised her sword. "Draw your weapon." "I don't carry one." "Then dodge." She moved. Not with warning, not with anger, just with clarity. The tip of her blade whistled through the air, flashing toward his shoulder. Feng's instincts kicked in. He dropped low, twisted, and let the wind guide him into a sidestep. Her sword passed just inches above his ear. Another step. Another cut. This time toward his ribs. He flowed backward, wind step, his feet barely touching stone. Leong followed. Blade silent, deadly, efficient. It wasn't sparring. It was teaching. She wasn't trying to injure him. Not quite. But she was trying to test something. He moved again, reading the angle of her feet, the dip in her shoulder, the way her breath paused right before she struck. The flow around her was cold and sharp, like the edge of winter. Each movement felt more like a decision than a reaction. This wasn't strength. It was control. He parried with his body, not his hands. A shoulder slip. A twist at the waist. A timed retreat. And finally, when her blade stopped a hair from his throat, he didn't flinch. Leong exhaled. Then stepped back. "You're not fast," she said. "But you're calm." Feng caught his breath, hands on his knees. "You could have just asked how I was doing." She tilted her head. "I don't ask things I can test." He looked up. Was that a compliment? She didn't answer. Instead, she lowered her sword and knelt beside a flat stone in the garden. From beneath it, she pulled a small wooden box. Inside was a scroll, rolled tightly, tied in blue silk. She handed it to him. "This is a sword movement manual," she said. "For body rhythm, not attacks. You don't need a blade to learn it." Feng hesitated. "Why me?" "Because the clan will keep watching you now," she said. "And the stronger you get, the more they'll expect you to choose a path." He turned the scroll over in his hands. "You're not a sword cultivator," she continued. "But your body listens to movement. This will make it sharper." He looked up. "Thank you." She turned away, already walking toward the path. "Don't thank me yet. The scroll's incomplete." He blinked. "Then why give it to me?" She looked back once, just over her shoulder. "Because you're the kind of person who finishes things." Then she vanished between the white trees. Back in his room, as the sun sank behind the clan walls, Feng unrolled the scroll and laid it across the floor. Jean watched from her perch on the shelf, nibbling on a dried fruit. "What's that?" "A gift." "From the sword girl?" He nodded. Jean narrowed her eyes. "She's trying to shape you. She's helping me train." "Same thing." He looked at the scroll. The movements were sketched with graceful brush strokes, diagrams of steps and shifts, each one paired with breath notes and posture alignments. It wasn't flashy. It was elegant. He stood and took his first step. And for a brief moment, it felt like the sword garden was beneath his feet again. The clan's inner garden was different from the outer fields. There was no training noise. No flying swords. No sparring circles. Only stillness. Here, the trees were old and coiled with moss that shimmered under light. The air smelled like crushed mint and morning fog. Blue light drifted lazily through the canopy, caught in slow-moving wisps of spiritual mist. Feng followed the path quietly, his robe brushing against the dew-soaked stone. He hadn't expected to be called here. An elder had appeared at breakfast that morning, handed him a plain slip of paper and said simply, "Report to the spirit garden by noon. You've been selected." No explanation. No questions allowed. Zhen had nearly dropped his chopsticks. Jean, curled beside the window, had only raised an eyebrow. "Garden trial?" she'd said. "They're sending you in early. Is that bad?" "It's not for fighting," she replied. "It's for listening." And now, standing at the edge of the formation stones, Feng understood what she meant. The garden spirit test was a sensitivity trial, designed to test how well a cultivator could feel the world, not break it. Ahead of him, 10 other disciples stood in a rough circle. Most were inner sect. A few outer. All older. All stronger. He recognized two. One was Jin Mu standing with arms crossed, his red-trimmed robes as sharp as his glare. The other was Lan, her silver blade sheathed, her eyes half-lidded like this whole event bored her. She didn't look at him. But she knew he was there. An elder stood in the center of the clearing. He was small, thin, with a long silver beard that reached his waist, and his voice was soft but firm. "This test will not judge your strength," the elder said. "It will not test your realm or your spirit flame or your ability to fight." He raised a hand and the wind in the garden fell still. "All it will measure is this: can you hear the spirit of the world?" At his gesture, glowing blue petals rose from the grass, drifting upward like soft embers. They spun lazily into the air before fading into motes of light. Each disciple stepped forward, one by one, and knelt before the heart stone, a flat, round slab of jade veined with silver lines. The test was simple in theory. Sit in silence, touch the stone, and open your spirit. The more clearly you resonated with the garden's energy, the brighter the stone would glow. Inner peace revealed inner strength. The first disciple stepped forward, a tall boy from the main branch. He knelt, placed his hand on the stone, and exhaled slowly. After a moment, the jade glowed pale green. 3 pulses, the elder said. Polite applause followed. The next girl stepped forward. Her robes bore the water crest of the cloud mist pavilion. She knelt with precision and bowed her head. The stone glowed brighter, soft blue this time with a faint ripple of silver around the edge. 5 pulses. More applause. Jinmu went next. He didn't kneel so much as sit like a war general, eyes shut tight in focus. When he touched the stone, the air trembled faintly. Red light surged across the jade surface, edged with orange flame. 6 pulses. The crowd murmured. Lan followed. She didn't close her eyes. She just sat, breathed once, and pressed her hand to the center. The stone didn't pulse. It hummed, a soft, rising tone that cut through the air like moonlight across a blade. Silver-white light covered the entire slab. 7 pulses. The elder nodded. Then it was Li Feng's turn. No one said anything. He stepped forward slowly, his shoes nearly silent on the moss-covered path. The other disciples watched, some with mild amusement, others with faint annoyance. No one expected much. He knelt before the stone. The surface was cold. Smooth. He placed his hand gently on its center. And waited. Nothing happened. No glow. No sound. Someone coughed behind him. Li Feng inhaled. He didn't push qi. He didn't try to activate anything. Instead he listened. Just as Jean had said. He opened the door inward. Let his thoughts quiet. Let the pressure fall away. And for the first time in his new life, he stopped thinking about what people saw when they looked at him. He just listened. To the garden. To the stone. To the quiet breath of the earth beneath his feet. The stone pulsed once. Soft blue. Then again. Brighter. Then once more, deeper, slower, like a heartbeat syncing with his own. The air didn't tremble. The jade didn't flare. But the moss around the heart stone stirred faintly, leaning toward him like grass reaching for rain. The elder's eyes narrowed slightly. 4 pulses, he said. Pause. Then he added, unaligned color. That was rare. Unaligned color meant the glow didn't match any known element. Fire, wind, water, wood, lightning. It wasn't a failure. But it wasn't normal either. Which meant it might be something else. Something they couldn't define. The disciples didn't clap. But they didn't mock him either. Because for a moment, just a flicker, they had felt it too. That stillness. That strange, centered presence. Li Feng bowed and stepped back. As he returned to the outer ring, Lan caught his eye. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. No words. Just acknowledgement. And that was enough. That night, Jean watched him trace the lines of the heart stone in memory, drawing them with chalk onto the back wall of the courtyard. You surprised them, she said. I didn't do anything special. You listened. That's rare. He didn't reply. But a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. In this life he didn't want to climb quickly. He just wanted to step without shaking. And for now he had taken another step. The outer grounds weren't usually dangerous. Most of the spirit beasts near the Azure Sky Clan's borders stayed away from the sect's active zones. The energy in the air was too dense, the patrols too regular, and the elders too quick to vaporize anything wild that wandered too close. So when the alarm chime rang out across the low hills, 3 long tones, 1 short, Li Feng froze mid-step. That wasn't a practice signal. That was a breach. He turned immediately toward the sound. It had come from the far edge of the herb gardens, near the spirit vine wall, where Zhen had recently contaminated the roots with his infamous stress pill mist, and where, according to Jean, the vines had begun acting weird. He ran. Win's step wasn't made for sprinting, but he used the movement rhythm to glide along the path, using the edges of stone and grass to push forward without losing balance. By the time he reached the wall, the outer courtyard was in chaos. Disciples scattered in all directions. Spirit herbs lay trampled across the ground. And something large and growling stood in the center of the wreckage, its form hunched and misshapen, like it had once been a fox or a badger but had grown too fast, too violently. Its fur glowed green. Its eyes were white and steaming. Jean appeared beside Li Feng in a shimmer of light, still in her smaller form. "That's a spirit corruption," she said. "Too much energy taken in too fast. The vines poisoned it." "It's in pain," Li Feng said. "It's also about to kill someone." The beast charged toward a nearby disciple, a younger girl who tripped backward over a broken pot, her hands raised in panic. Li Feng moved. He didn't think. He just moved. He dropped to one knee beside her and dragged her out of the way as the beast's claws scraped the dirt beside them. He turned and shouted, "Get to the Elder's Hall." She ran. The beast snarled and turned on him. Li Feng felt the pressure like a wave, its chi was wild, thrashing like a river that had forgotten how to flow. He could barely track its energy pattern. His flow pulse listening skill gave him a blurred outline, but the creature was too unstable, too loud. He braced himself ready to dodge. But Jean stepped forward. Her paws pressed lightly into the ground and her body began to glow. Not bright. Not fiery. Just steady. She grew, not into some towering divine fox, but into a form slightly taller than Li Feng's shoulder. Sleek white fur. 9 tails. Gold-ringed eyes that shimmered with cold clarity. And the pressure in the air shifted. The corrupted beast paused. For the first time since its rampage began, it hesitated. Jin's voice echoed softly. "Be still." She didn't shout. She didn't attack. She just walked forward, every step slow and measured. The beast growled again and lunged. And that's when Jean vanished. One blink. And she was behind it. Her tail moved once, just once, and a ripple of lightning surged across the ground, sharp and blue and crackling like ice on fire. The beast dropped mid-lunge, spasming as electricity wrapped around its limbs. Li Feng stared. It wasn't violent. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. The creature trembled, then fell still. Unconscious. Not dead. Jean stood over it, calm, her tail swaying like drifting silk. "That was necessary," she said quietly. Li Feng took a step forward. "That wasn't a normal strike. I told you I'm not normal." He looked at her closely. "You used lightning." "Part of me is storm-touched," she replied. "Old bloodline. Comes in handy." She turned and walked back toward the gate. "What should I tell the elders?" Li Feng asked. "Nothing," she said. "Let them think the formation stone surged." Li Feng paused. "Why?" "Because if word gets out that you have a lightning-aligned spirit beast living in your room, they'll stop watching you from a distance." She looked over her shoulder, her eyes sharp. "And start watching you up close." By the time the Elder Patrol arrived, the beast was bound in a spiritual net, unconscious and breathing. The damage to the courtyard was minimal, just crushed vines, overturned pots, and a few stunned disciples. Elder Miao arrived last, his eyes sweeping the scene like a hawk. He stopped beside Li Feng. "You were the first one here." Li Feng nodded. "You stayed. Helped others escape." Another nod. Miao didn't smile. But something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe? He looked toward the spirit beast, then at the burned circle of stone beneath its body. Lightning pulse. But no clouds. Curious. He turned and walked away. That night, Li Feng sat at the edge of the roof, Jean beside him in her smaller form. The wind was soft. No alarms. No shouting. Just silence again. "You didn't have to step in," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," she replied. "You're not strong enough yet." "I still want to be." She looked at him for a long moment. Then said, "Good." He watched the stars and whispered into the dark. "I don't want to be the boy people ignore. I want to stand for something." Jin's tail brushed against his arm. "You're already standing," she said. "Just not tall enough yet." The inner courtyard of the Azure Sky clan's ancestral wing was quiet. Too quiet. Li Feng walked slowly, his steps echoing on the polished stone path. Every breath of wind seemed sharper here. Every tree too perfectly trimmed. every lantern placed with unnatural precision. This was not a space for comfort, it was a space for judgment. And somewhere beyond the red stone pillars and bronze doors was the man who had summoned him. Patriarch Tauen, his grandfather. Feng paused at the final step. A servant bowed low and opened the heavy door without a word. Inside, the room was spare, just a long-sitting mat, a table carved from starwood, and shelves lined with scrolls and jade tablets that pulsed faintly with age. The man seated at the table did not look like the head of the most powerful clan in the world. He looked tired. His beard was streaked with silver, but not from weakness. His shoulders were straight, but there was weight on them. His eyes were sharp, but not cruel. He looked up slowly, and for a moment said nothing. Feng bowed deeply. Grandfather. Tauen gestured for him to sit. Feng knelt across from him, hands folded neatly, eyes downcast. The silence stretched. Then, "You've changed." Feng looked up. The words weren't an accusation. Not praise either. Just observation. "I've been trying," Feng said. Tauen studied him for a long moment. "I heard about the spar, the tea spill, the garden trial, the beast attack." Feng said nothing. "I also heard," the Patriarch continued, "that you didn't flinch when your opponent tried to break your guard, that you stayed behind to protect others during the breach, that you moved like someone who trained for years, not days." He poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to Feng. Feng accepted it with both hands. "You're not here because you're in trouble," Tauen said. "You're here because you've started to attract attention." The tea was warm, bitter, and grounding. Feng drank slowly. "I didn't mean to attract anything," he said. "That's the problem," Tauen replied. "Things don't care what you mean. They care what you do." He placed his cup down with a soft clink. "There are 3 kinds of cultivators in this world. Those who seek power, those who seek peace, and those who are chosen, by fate, by blood, or by force, to stand in front of storms." Feng looked at him. "Which one are you?" Tauen smiled faintly. "I was the first, became the third, and still don't know if it was worth it." He leaned forward. "Our clan is not as united as it seems. The outer branches scheme. The inner elders argue. You've been left alone because you were seen as harmless. That is changing." Feng's throat tightened. "Are you warning me?" "I'm preparing you," Tauen said. "The more steps you take, the fewer places there are to rest. And someday someone will ask you what path you're walking." "I don't know yet," Feng admitted. "You don't have to," Tauen replied. "Not yet." He reached into his sleeve and placed a small, worn token on the table. It was plain, round, etched with a single cloud-shaped pattern and a faintly glowing center. "This belonged to your mother," he said. "She was never the strongest, but she understood people, understood silence." Feng stared at the token. It pulsed gently when his fingers touched it. "It's not a weapon," his grandfather said, "but it might open a door someday." He stood. The conversation was over. But before Feng could bow again, the old man spoke one last time. "You don't have to impress me," he said. Feng blinked. Taun's eyes, tired but warm, held his grandson's gaze. "You just have to survive long enough to become who you're meant to be." The halls were still quiet as Feng left the ancestral wing, the token heavy in his palm. The air outside felt clearer somehow, brighter. He slipped the token into his sleeve. He didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But he knew this. His grandfather hadn't called him in to discipline him. He'd called him in to see him. And maybe, just maybe, he'd been seen. That night, Jean didn't ask questions. She just curled beside him under the open eaves as the wind passed over the rooftop. "You smell different," she said. "Wiser." "No. Older." Feng laughed softly. "I think," he said, "I've just been reminded that this world expects something from me." Jean yawned. "So, what are you going to do?" He watched the stars blink quietly in the sky. "I'm going to keep walking." She didn't reply. But her tail curled once around his arm. The trial was announced at dawn. A single bell rang from the inner tower, clear, solemn, final. The kind of sound that wasn't questioned. Feng stood beneath the covered walkway of the training court, sipping tea that had already gone cold. He hadn't planned to attend the announcement. But Jean had practically kicked him out of bed. "They don't ring the jade bell unless it's serious," she'd said. "And it's better to hear your fate in public than behind closed doors." So now he stood among a crowd of outer sect disciples, some still half asleep, others straightening their robes with hopeful eyes. A thin elder in dark green stepped onto the platform above the court. "Elder Shu." sharp-voiced, known for long speeches and short tempers. He didn't waste time today. You've been called because the seasonal trial begins in 3 days, he said. The verdant mystic forest will open for the first time this year. A window of 7 days has been confirmed. The sect will send 12 disciples. A murmur moved through the crowd. The verdant mystic forest was a borderland region, a protected wilderness filled with spirit beasts, rare herbs, unstable energy fields, and old ruins. Most went in as part of controlled patrols. But once a year, selected disciples entered in groups. No elders, no guardians, to prove their growth. Feng had heard stories. Beasts that moved like shadows. Trees that whispered Tao riddles. Paths that vanished once walked. He didn't expect to be part of it. Then Elder Shu continued. Selection has already been made. Your names were chosen based on recent performance, recommendation, and elder vote. He unrolled a scroll. Feng folded his arms. Zhen leaned in beside him. If your name's on there, I'm baking something. Like a cake? Like a fireproof talisman. The names began. Jin Mu. No surprise. Lan Yu. Of course. Wu Rin. Shuatao. Min Fei. Each name echoed through the courtyard. Until. Feng. Silence. For half a beat. Then whispering. Someone laughed. Another hissed under their breath. A few looked around, unsure if they'd misheard. Feng stayed still. Zhen blinked. I'll get the talisman parchment. Elder Shu kept reading. When the list ended, the crowd began to shift, the murmuring rising again. Jin Mu pushed through the group with purposeful strides, stopping directly in front of Feng. You don't belong on that list. Feng looked at him calmly. I didn't put myself on it. You're not ready, Jin Mu said. You'll slow us down. Or worse, get someone killed. I guess that depends on how you define ready. Jin Mu's jaw tightened. Lan stepped beside them, silent as always. She looked at Jin Mu. The elders chose him. He hasn't even broken into mid-realm. Lan shrugged. Neither had I when I first entered. Jin Mu scoffed but didn't argue. He turned and walked away, cloak sweeping behind him. Zhen appeared seconds later, holding a scroll with a hand-drawn charm sketched onto it. I'll enchant it tonight, he said. Keeps you from burning alive if someone throws a flame technique at you. Reassuring, Feng muttered. Zhen grinned. You've made the big stage, my friend. Now we find out if the floor breaks under your feet. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Lan offered no advice. She simply trained harder. Zhen brewed something that smoked even when sealed. Jean vanished for hours, then returned covered in dew and grumbling about the trial being too early in the year. Feng trained in the garden, repeating the wind step and sword rhythm patterns again and again until his breath aligned with the trees. When he stopped, Jean was watching him. You're not strong enough for what's in that forest, she said. I know. But you're going anyway. He nodded. Why? He thought for a long moment. Then said, because this time I want to know what I'm capable of. Not just what others think I'm not. She didn't smile. But her tail flicked once. The morning of the departure, the 12 chosen disciples gathered at the east gate. Each wore travel robes, simple and reinforced with spirit thread. They carried satchels of pills, scrolls, and rations. No one joked. No one smiled. Feng arrived just before sunrise. The gate opened slowly, revealing the forest path beyond. Mist curled along the trees, glowing faintly with spirit light. Elder Shu raised his hand. The gate will close in 7 days, he said. Survive and you may return stronger. Fail, and the forest will remember your name. Feng stepped forward. And for the first time since his rebirth, he walked willingly into the unknown. The verdant mystic forest didn't welcome them. It tolerated them. The moment Feng passed through the gate, he felt it, that soft, oppressive hum just beneath the earth. A presence. Not quite hostile, not quite kind. Just aware. The trees here were older, taller than anything near the Azure Sky Clan's walls. Their branches twisted high into the fog, wrapped in hanging moss and whispering leaves. Light passed through them like moonlight through smoke, soft, silver, shifting. 12 disciples walked single file along a narrow path, their boots silent on the mossy ground. No one spoke. They had been warned not to. Sound traveled strangely here. The forest was filled with echoes, half-heard voices, illusion mists, and strange pulses of spirit energy that could draw spirit beasts or confuse a cultivator's sense of direction. They would travel for 1 hour, set up the first camp, then split into groups of 3. Feng walked near the middle of the group. Zhen walked beside him, carrying a bag that clinked every time he moved. Probably pills. Lan walked ahead, leading silently. Her sword gleamed faintly with each step. Jean, invisible to the rest, perched lightly on Li Feng's shoulder in her smaller form. "This place is ancient," she whispered into his ear. "It remembers things. Be careful what you give it." "What does that mean?" he murmured back. "Your thoughts, your feelings, even your fears. The forest likes to keep them." He stayed silent after that. The wind shifted as they reached a fork in the path. There, nestled between two carved stones, stood a weather-worn shrine. Nothing but a slab of cracked jade resting on a pedestal of roots and broken offerings. It looked abandoned, almost forgotten. But the moment Li Feng's eyes landed on it, the system triggered. System check-in triggered. Location: verdant forest, forgotten shrine of the first root. Condition met: entry with open spirit. Check-in successful. Reward unlocked: whisper root charm. Item type: passive artifact. Effect: reduces the presence of user's spiritual energy, grants partial resistance to illusion-based Dao fields and fear-type spiritual pressure. Durability: stable. The charm appeared in his palm. A small pendant of dull wood, carved into a spiral. He turned it over once, then looped it around his wrist under his sleeve. Not flashy, not powerful, but useful, and maybe protective. Jean glanced down at it. "Rare," she said. "Not many of those left. Spirit sensitives used them during the Fog Wars." Fog Wars. She didn't explain. The group stopped in a clearing shortly after, ringed by thick roots and vine-covered stones. They began setting up a basic shelter formation, spirit markers placed in a square around the camp to deter lower-level beasts. Li Feng moved to help. But before he could set his marker, he felt it. A pressure in the air. Something watching from beyond the edge of the trees. It wasn't a beast. It wasn't another disciple. It was deeper. Like the forest had opened one eye and chosen him to look at first. His hand tightened around the charm. Jin nudged him. "You all right?" "Yeah," Li Feng said. "Just thinking." "Don't do too much of that out here," Jin muttered, placing his charm stone on the ground. "This place eats thoughts." Li Feng nodded slowly. But his eyes never left the trees. That night, they sat around a low flame, cooking dried meat and spirit root stew. Lan sat across the fire, sharpening her sword. Her blade reflected the flames like a mirror that didn't belong in this world. Jin stirred the pot and made sarcastic comments about fungus rations. Li Feng listened. And thought. He'd survived his first spar. Passed his first spiritual test. Held his ground in a beast encounter. Now he was here, in a forest filled with ancient energy and living memory. He was still the weakest on paper. But he had stepped through the gate. And the forest had looked back. Later, alone, he walked to the edge of the light and stared out into the trees. The wind moved softly across his face. Then something moved in return. A whisper, not in words but in presence. Faint. Barely there. But clear. Like the forest was saying, "You are not like the others. We will see." The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Even footsteps faded here. Li Feng adjusted the straps on his travel pack and followed the narrow trail behind Lan, who moved like mist across roots and moss. Jin trailed behind, mumbling about pollen and antitoxin formulas. Jean rode on Li Feng's shoulder in her fox form, silent, alert. They had been walking for hours since breaking off from the main party. Each trial team was made of 3. 12 disciples split into 4 groups. Lan, Jin, Feng. No one questioned the pairing. At least not out loud. Still, Feng had noticed the looks. Jean Mu's glare. The muttering from the Cloud Pavilion disciples. Even a few of the elders back at the gate had paused a moment too long before reading his name. He wasn't supposed to be here. And yet, the forest didn't reject him. If anything, it welcomed him. The air pulsed gently around them. Spirit energy rolled in slow waves, thick and ancient, more like water than air. Lan raised a hand. They stopped. Feng tensed. "What is it?" "Someone's following us," she whispered. Jin's tail stilled. Jin squinted back into the trees. "I don't see anyone." "Because they're not walking," Jean said softly. "They're floating." Lan slowly reached for her sword hilt. A faint rustle came from the trees above. Then another. Feng extended his senses. The forest became a map in his mind, flow pulse listening activating instinctively. The wind curled around trees. A shift of energy. A strange flicker. There. Above them. To the right. 2 figures. No, not people. Lan drew her blade in a single motion. A vine shot down from above, green and barbed like a whip made from thorns. Lan slashed it cleanly, sparks flying from her sword. More vines snapped down. One coiled around Jin's ankle. Feng moved. One step. He reached Jin in a blink, slicing the vine with the edge of a fallen blade shard nearby. A second vine wrapped around his arm. Jin leapt from his shoulder and bit through it, lightning sparking from her tiny fangs. Then silence. No more vines. No more movement. The air cleared. Lan pointed her sword upward. Nothing. Just mist and branches. Testing us, she said. Jin sat on the ground, panting. I knew I should have packed more repellent. Li Feng looked up into the trees. Whatever that was, he said, it wasn't trying to kill us. Not yet, Jin added. But that was a warning. They pressed on. They made camp beside a low waterfall that night. The water glowed faintly with blue spirit light. The air was damp but quiet. Safe enough. Lan meditated under a tree. Jin boiled herbs. Feng sat at the edge of the water watching ripples dance across the surface. Jin curled beside him. That vine thing, he said. It didn't feel like a beast. It wasn't, she said. It was the forest. Feng turned to her. You mean the spirit energy? I mean the forest. He didn't press her. But a weight settled in his chest. This place wasn't just alive. It was aware. And something in it had started whispering the moment he arrived. That night, as Feng closed his eyes, the system flickered in silence. Hidden tracking activated. Verdant trial phase 1 complete. Observation level increased. No reward. Just a message. Something was watching. And it was keeping score. By mid-morning the mist had thickened. Not the kind that floated lazily across the ground, but a low, clinging haze that dampened sound and blurred shapes. Even Lan's sword gleamed dulled in the light. Feng adjusted his footing as the path gave way to soft moss. Beneath it, faintly glowing vines twisted like veins in the soil. Visibility's dropping, Jin said from behind. We should stop soon. No, Lan replied, quiet but certain. There's a harvesting zone nearby. Jin's eyes brightened. A spirit herb patch? Lan nodded. 200 steps north. If the map is still accurate. What's the herb? Feng asked. Silver root bloom. Used in focus pills. Jin added, also used in illusion stabilizers. Rare stuff. Grows under shaded roots shaped like a spiral. But careful, harvesting it wrong triggers a defense mechanism. Feng raised an eyebrow. What kind? The kind that stings. Lan stepped over a moss-covered log. And bites. They found the bloom 30 minutes later. The clearing was small, barely wide enough for all three of them to stand shoulder to shoulder. Towering trees ringed the edges, their roots arching up like the bones of some sleeping beast. The light here had a faint silver hue, and nestled among the shadows at the base of the roots were the herbs. Tiny, spiraling white flowers, their petals tipped with faint blue dust. Silver root bloom. Lan knelt immediately, her movements precise. Don't pluck, she said. Use a carving motion. From underneath. And no sudden chi release. Jin unpacked a narrow-bladed tool from his satchel and joined her. Feng hesitated. Something felt off. He stepped to the edge of the clearing and activated flow pulse listening. The world slowed. Not physically but in awareness. The moss shifted. The air bent. And beneath the earth, movement, slow, quote, buried just beneath the roots. Wait, he said. Lan and Jin both froze. He pointed toward the far side of the clearing. There's something under the soil. Big. Jin narrowed his eyes. Beast? Feng shook his head. Not breathing. But waiting. Might be part of the roots. Lan stood slowly. Trap beast. Feng looked at her. That's real? Yes, she said. Not a creature. Not a plant. Something in between. They grow like roots. Feed off spiritual movement. If you trigger one, it snaps shut like a cage. Jin stepped back carefully. So what do we do? Feng closed his eyes. The pulse under the soil wasn't consistent. It had a rhythm, slow, timed with the drifting mist. He focused. Listened. Moved his hand slowly toward the herb closest to him and waited for the pulse to fade. Then, in a single breath, he pulled from underneath just as Lan had shown him. The flower came free, clean, undisturbed. No reaction from the ground. Lan watched closely. Jin whispered, You're getting good at that whole, sensing the earth thing. Luck, Feng muttered. Jean, watching from a branch above, chuckled softly. You're lying, she said. Lan stepped forward and mimicked his timing. Another bloom came loose. Then another. Between the three of them, they harvested 8 clean samples without stirring the trapped beast. When they stepped out of the clearing, Feng finally exhaled. Zhen held up the wrapped herbs like treasure. We're going to be rich. Trial points, Lan corrected. Not money. Zhen winked. Same thing if you survive. That night, they camped near a small pool with a waterfall no taller than a child. The air here was clearer. Lan set the herbs out to dry beside the fire. Zhen roasted root slices with a faint spicy scent and scribbled notes in his notebook, sketching the trap beast layout from memory. Feng sat near the edge of the water, hand on the new charm, the whisper root, still cool to the touch. You're learning, Jean said quietly beside him. I'm surviving. Same thing. For now. He looked at the ripples on the surface of the pool. I didn't feel strong, he said. I just felt. And that, she said, is why the forest hasn't tried to eat you yet. He looked at her. Yet? Jean grinned. We're barely on the second page. He smiled faintly, then looked out into the woods again. The forest didn't punish him for being weak. It punished those who stopped paying attention. And so far listening had kept him alive. The air turned glassy before they saw it. Like breath caught in a bubble. Lan stopped first. Don't move, she said. Zhen nearly stepped forward but froze mid-step, teetering on one foot. What is it? Feng reached out with his senses. Flow pulse listening surged outward in a slow wave. And immediately bounced back. Not just off the trees or stones, but from something ahead. Something reflective. It's not wind, Feng said. Something's distorting the space. Lan pointed. There, nestled among the roots of an old broken shrine, was a single flower. Wide, flat, silver-petaled. Its center pulsed like a heartbeat. The ground around it was undisturbed. No vines, no roots. No animals. Just silence. A mirror bloom, Lan said. Didn't think they actually existed. Zhen stepped carefully beside her. Aren't those supposed to show you your own spirit core? They do more than that, she said. They reflect your spiritual energy back at you. Raw and unfiltered. Like a test. Like a trap, Lan replied. If you're not centered, it shatters your sense of self. Drives you into an illusion loop. Feng frowned. So why is it here? The forest is watching, Jean said softly from behind. And it's curious what you fear. No one spoke. Then without warning Lan stepped forward. Lan? Feng said quickly. What are you doing? She didn't look back. I want to see it. Zhen reached for her arm. That's not smart. She stopped just at the edge of the shrine and knelt, one hand brushing the grass near the flower. The petals shimmered. A soundless pulse rippled outward, like a chime heard through water. Lan's body stilled. Her eyes clouded. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Just sat, knees folded, face blank, like she was caught between waking and dreaming. Feng rushed forward. Zhen held him back. Don't touch her. We can't leave her like that. She went in willingly, Zhen said. Now we wait. But what if? Feng. Zhen's voice was calm but firm. Lan's not reckless. If she's in there, she believed she could face it. Feng looked at her again. She hadn't changed. No pain. No shaking. But her presence had dimmed. Like she wasn't quite there anymore. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The wind shifted slightly. Jean landed beside them in her larger form and narrowed her eyes at the bloom. She's stuck. What do we do? Feng asked. Can you see inside? Jean asked Jean. No. It's not a spatial illusion. It's internal. The flower creates a mirror of the soul. If she fears something, it will turn that fear into a cage. Feng knelt beside her, just outside the pulse radius. She's strong, he said. Why isn't she breaking free? Because strength has nothing to do with it, Jean said. Reflection isn't about power. It's about what you can accept. Zhen pulled a small scroll from his pouch, fumbled through some scribbled notes, then looked up. There might be one way. Tell me, Feng said. Zhen looked unsure. You have to send in a stabilizing presence. Something she recognizes. Something she'll respond to. Like a memory? Like a voice. Feng hesitated. Then stood. He walked forward just to the edge of the flower's reach and sat. He didn't enter its energy field. He didn't touch her. But he began to speak. You told me once that sword footwork starts with wind. No response. He went on. You said I wasn't fast but I was calm. That I shouldn't give anyone an excuse to dismiss me. Still nothing. You never compliment people. You never explain anything. But when I move wrong you correct me. When I'm quiet you nod. When I stay standing you stay watching. He looked at her, still unmoving. Maybe you don't remember that right now. But I do. And I'm not letting you forget it. He leaned closer. I don't care how sharp the blade inside your head is. I'm staying right here until you come out. Then, movement. Her hand twitched. Her head turned slightly, lips parting like someone catching breath after diving too deep. And then her eyes snapped open. She gasped and staggered forward. Feng caught her shoulders gently. The flower behind her flickered once and wilted. Its petals collapsed inward. The glow faded. The shrine cracked. And the air around them cleared. Lan blinked several times. She was sweating. Her breath came in uneven waves. But she was back. Jin crouched beside her and handed her a flask of water. She drank, slow and steady. Finally she looked at Feng. What did you say to me? He hesitated. Nothing important. Her eyes narrowed. It brought me back. Then maybe it was important. She studied him for a moment, then nodded once, very slightly. Jean walked around the flower's remains, tail flicking. She faced herself, she said, and came back stronger. Lan stood slowly. Then said, we need to move. They left the shrine behind as the sun dipped lower through the mist. Lan walked ahead without comment. Jin walked beside Feng, whispering, that was something. She's all right now, Feng said. Yeah, but what about you? Feng paused. What do you mean? Jin grinned. You just lectured the girl who nearly cut a falcon in half. Bold move. Feng rolled his eyes. But the truth was, he had been scared. Not of the forest. Not of the flower. But of what would have happened if Lan hadn't come back. That fear was still with him even as the trees closed in again. But he didn't regret stepping forward. Not for a second. That night, their campfire was quiet. No lessons. No sparring. Just warmth and silence. Lan sat with her sword across her lap, the edge still dusty from earlier. She glanced at Feng once. Then said softly, thank you. He looked at her. She didn't look away. You're welcome, he replied. Jean curled up beside them. Zhen snored somewhere deeper in the tent. The fire cracked gently. And for the first time in the forest, they weren't just teammates, they were something else. They found the ruins by accident. Midway through the third day, while tracing a stream that shimmered faintly with spirit energy, Zhen had gone chasing a rare fungus, glowcap spores, he called them, apparently good for alchemical clarity pills, and stumbled into a broken stone path hidden beneath moss and fallen leaves. Over here, he called. There's something buried. Feng and Lan joined him minutes later, brushing aside vines to reveal the outline of an ancient floor. Smooth slate cracked with time, curling in a spiral pattern that marked the shape of a once wide room. It had no roof. Just the shattered remnants of columns and half-swallowed steps leading into shadow. The forest was reclaiming it. But something still pulsed there. Something waiting. Jean sniffed the air. Her tail twitched. Old formation work. Whatever this was, it was important. Lan stepped cautiously inside, eyes scanning the carved floor. A cultivation ground? Possibly, Zhen said, already pulling out a brush to clear away dirt from a fallen tablet. This symbol's old. Pre-unification era. Spirit technique school maybe? Feng knelt at the edge of the center ring. The pattern on the floor caught his attention. A spiral of wind lines, thin grooves etched in near-perfect arcs, like the ripple pattern of air itself. He placed his palm on the center. And the system responded. System check-in triggered. Location, verdant mystic forest, ruined pavilion of echoes. Condition met. Resonant breathing alignment. Check-in successful. Reward unlocked. Empty wind hilt. Type, artifact fragment. Description, a sword hilt infused with silent resonance. The blade is missing. Effect, when gripped, enhances the user's internal airflow and stabilizes movement arts. Future compatibility, locked. Rarity, unclassified. A faint breeze swept across the stone. And then, with a soft shimmer, something appeared in front of him. Not a weapon. Not a scroll. A single hilt. Worn, silver-threaded, with a jade inlay shaped like a flowing gust. No blade extended from it. Just the handle. Feng picked it up. The moment his fingers closed around it, he felt his breath shift. Deeper, calmer, like his lungs aligned with something invisible. He stood slowly. What did you find? Lan asked. Feng turned. Held up the hilt. Zhen tilted his head. That's it. There's no blade, Lan said. Jean dropped from a nearby stone and padded closer. She sniffed it once, then stared hard at Feng. That's not a weapon, she said. Not yet. Then what is it? A piece of a Tao tool, she replied. A sword born from breath. Jin's eyebrows rose. Is that a real thing? Very rare, Jin said. Spirit-forged weapons that only exist when called. The blade only appears if the wielder can match the frequency of its creation. Feng looked at the hilt again. It was quiet in his hand but not empty. Something about it listened. Jin's voice dropped lower. If the blade doesn't form, it will stay dead metal. But if it does, it becomes a reflection of the wielder's intent. Feng turned the hilt slowly in his hand. Lan's voice cut in even. It's not a power boost. I know. Then why keep it? Feng stared at the jade spiral in the grip. Because I'm tired of using tools I don't understand. They stayed in the ruins for an hour longer. Jin mapped the floor. Lan tested the outer edge of the formation, eyes narrowing as faint threads of spirit still clung to the stone. Feng walked the spiral path once, holding the hilt. No blade appeared. But each step felt lighter. And when he used wind step near the center, the spiral caught the motion, amplifying it, letting him travel 3 paces farther with half the effort. It wasn't raw speed. It was resonance. Matching the space. Matching himself. That night, they camped on a ledge near the pavilion, above a pool that mirrored the stars. The fire burned low. Zhen brewed something that smelled like spicy ginger and swamp. Lan sat sharpening her sword. But occasionally, her eyes drifted to the hilt at Feng's side. He felt the weight of it, not physically but spiritually. A silent question. What will this become? Jean sat beside him, tails curled. You should name it, she said. It's not a sword yet. Even a seed deserves a name. Feng considered. Then almost quietly said, Second wind. Jean blinked. Why? He looked up at the dark sky. Because sometimes it's not the first breath that saves you. It's the next one. She didn't respond. But she didn't tease him either. Later that night, when the fire had burned low and the others slept, Feng took the hilt out again. He gripped it gently with both hands, closed his eyes and breathed. One breath in. The world narrowed. One breath out. The forest slowed. He whispered. I'm not rushing. I'm not forcing. I'm just walking. No light answered. No blade formed. But somewhere deep in the jade inlay, a faint warmth pulsed once, like an ember stirred by wind. And Feng smiled. Because he knew. It had heard him. The trees began to thin as the group climbed higher. The forest had been dense for days. Close branches filtered light, layers of shadow. But now the air grew clearer. The wind stronger. The light above came directly from the open sky, no longer shielded by ancient leaves. Lan stepped over a gnarled root and looked up. The ridge is close. Zhen groaned behind her. A ridge. Great. Because what this expedition needed was more climbing. Feng didn't reply. He was listening. Something about the wind had changed. It wasn't just moving, it was watching. Jean, perched on a high branch nearby in her fox form, narrowed her eyes. Careful. Lan turned slightly. You feel it too? Feng nodded. We're being hunted. The air was too still between gusts. And the gusts, when they came, were too focused. Sharp, slicing through the canopy with unnatural speed. Lan pulled her sword half from its sheath. Skyroot. Zhen blinked. What's that? A spirit-class predator bird, she said. Fast. Precise. Hunts cultivators with a pulse rhythm that mimics breeze patterns. Almost invisible during descent. Feng's heart beat faster. How do we stop it? Lan didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a cloth from her bag and quickly tied it around her wrist, then dropped to a crouch behind a wide root. Don't look up. Just listen. The 3 of them stilled. Wind brushed the treetops. Then again. Then. Silence. The next gust didn't come. Feng's breath caught. He reached instinctively for the empty wind hilt at his side. The second his hand closed around it, something above snapped downward. A blur tore through the sky, a streak of brown and silver. Talons slammed into the earth where Lan had stood a heartbeat before. But she was gone, already moving, blade drawn, slicing through the aftershadow of the strike. The falcon twisted midair, wings carving the air like knives. It was huge, easily the size of a wolf, with bark-colored feathers and glowing eyes the color of sap. It let out no cry. Just movement. It came again. Feng stepped forward without thinking. Wind step, flow not force. His body moved before his thoughts caught up. He didn't blink. Didn't tense. He simply shifted. And the falcon missed him by inches, its talons slicing the moss at his heels. Jin dug behind a stump. I vote we don't fight this thing. No choice. Lon shouted. It's territorial. The falcon rose again, circling above. Its shadow passed once, twice, then vanished. Where is it? Jin hissed. Feng knelt. Not to hide. To listen. He reached inward, activating flow pulse listening, but stronger now. Wider. The forest blurred at the edges. The wind became lines. Shapes. Arcs. There. Above. Fast. Descending. From behind Jin. Jin right side. Jin ducked just in time as the falcon slammed into the stump beside him, shattering wood and soil. Lan lunged. Her blade met its wing, carving a shallow gash. The beast shrieked. That was its first sound. It lifted again, wounded now. Faster. Angrier. It wouldn't retreat. It would finish them. Feng gripped the hilt tighter. And something changed. The jade spiral in the hilt hummed, low, deep, not quite audible. A pressure ran up his arm. Not pain. Not power. Alignment. The wind around his body stilled for one perfect breath. And then, it followed him. He didn't leap. He didn't fly. He simply stepped, and traveled 10 paces in a blink, sideways across the moss, the air carrying him like a leaf on a turning current. The falcon turned. But too late. Feng stood beneath it, and raised the hilt like it was a blade. Wind gathered at the tip. Not visible but felt. Lan's eyes widened. For a single heartbeat, a glimmer of silver air shaped itself above the hilt. A phantom blade. Not real. Not solid. But present. Feng brought the hilt down as if slashing. The wind responded. A narrow gust sliced upward, catching the falcon's wing mid-turn. It howled and spiraled back, crashing into the roots with a burst of leaves. It didn't move again. Lan rushed forward, blade at the ready, but the beast was already fading. Its body shimmered. Spirit mist escaped from its feathers like breath. It was already dissolving. Jin peeked out. Is it dead? No, Lan said. It's retreating. Spirit form dispersal. It'll regrow somewhere deeper. Jean landed beside the broken root. That was reckless, she said. Feng dropped to one knee, breathing hard. The hilt in his hand still pulsed, slow and steady. But the phantom blade was gone. Jin approached cautiously. You cut wind with wind. Lan stood above Feng, her sword resting against her shoulder. You're getting faster. He looked up at her. No, he said. The wind is getting used to me. Later at camp, the fire flickered quietly beneath a shelf of moss-covered stone. The ridge overlooked the forest below, giving them their first full view of how far they had come. Mists rolled over the canopy like tides. Feng sat with the hilt across his lap. Jin stirred the stew. So, are we going to talk about what you did? Feng said nothing. Lan was sharpening her blade but not looking at it. She was watching him. You're not hiding anymore, she said. He nodded. I don't need to. Jean curled beside the flame. The forest knows your rhythm now, she said. That blade, if it's ever going to fully form, it'll do it here. Why here? Feng asked. Because this place isn't made of stone or pride, she said. It's made of silence and instinct. Feng looked down at the hilt. For the first time it felt familiar. Like a part of him that hadn't yet spoken. But now whispered softly. The second camp wasn't theirs alone. By the time Li Feng's group reached the wide clearing by the waterfall basin, another team was already there. Tents arranged neatly. Fire pit already lit. Spirit wards in place. Someone had even laid a fresh sheet of bark as a makeshift table. Jin let out a sigh. Of course. Lan was quiet, eyes already scanning the group. Feng recognized the crest stitched into one of the travel cloaks, Cloud Pavilion, and beside it, a heavier red trim embroidered with flame motifs. Jinmu. He was seated on a rock, polishing the edge of his short spear. When he looked up and saw Feng, his lips curved, not into a smile but something sharper. Well, he said. The Windwalker arrives. Feng said nothing. Jin leaned in. We can still camp farther west. Lan stepped forward without hesitation and bowed slightly toward the Cloud Pavilion second in command. Shared territory. We'll keep to the upper ledge. A younger girl from the other team nodded, but Jinmu stood, resting his spear against one shoulder. Before you go, he said casually, I heard something. Jin muttered, Here we go. Jinmu walked slowly across the clearing, stopping just a few steps in front of Feng. There's a story floating between trees, he said. About a boy with no cultivation realm cutting down a skyroot falcon with a gust of wind. Feng met his gaze. Come. unmoving. No blade. No technique scroll. Just a wave of his hand and whoosh. Jinmu's smile was lazy but his eyes weren't. I don't like rumors, he continued. They confuse the truth. Lon stepped forward. It wasn't a duel. It was survival. That's so. Jinmu glanced at her, then back to Feng. Then let's call this a demonstration. Feng tilted his head slightly. Of what? Of reality, Jinmu said. You've been floating. Drifting. Dodging real challenges. So I'm giving you a clean one. No beasts. No illusions. Just you and me. One move. Jin tensed. One move. Strike once, Jinmu said, looking only at Feng. And I strike once back. You walk away after that if you can. Or not. Feng was quiet. Jin stepped forward from the shadows and said in a soft voice, He's baiting you. I know. You don't have to prove anything. Feng's fingers brushed the hilt at his side. He looked at Jinmu. You want one move? Jinmu raised an eyebrow. Are you agreeing? Feng nodded. Yes. But not here. They chose a narrow ledge between trees, flat and open enough to stand but not wide enough to move freely. A test of control. Jinmu turned his spear slowly in hand. First strike is yours, he said. Lan stood nearby, arms crossed. Jin whispered, he shouldn't take this. Maybe not, Lan replied. But he's going to anyway, Jin said. Feng stepped forward. He didn't bow. He didn't posture. He simply raised the empty wind hilt, exhaled, and listened. The wind wasn't strong here. It didn't roar. It whispered. Soft. Patient. And it remembered him. He gripped the hilt. The air shifted. The jade spiral hummed quietly. One breath. One step. No speed. Just silence. He vanished. Jinmu's eyes snapped toward the movement, tracking him instantly. Feng reappeared 5 steps to the side, his feet sliding along the ledge. Then, he struck. No blade appeared. Only pressure. A burst of displaced wind, like a silent slap across the chest. It hit Jinmu's shoulder, cleanly but not forcefully. He took a step back, then steadied, and smiled. My turn. He twisted the spear once and let it fall. Fire bloomed. A pulse of heat coiled around the shaft, spiral-etched, flame-bound. The spear lunged forward with a single, swift strike. Not aimed at the chest. At Feng's knee. Feng dropped low, too late to fully dodge. The fire scorched past his outer robe, grazing fabric. He winced, but kept his balance. Jinmu stepped back and caught the falling spear with one hand. Not bad, he said. But you can't win fights with whispers. He turned and walked away. The challenge was over. No winner. But the message had been clear. Not everyone was convinced by tricks and instincts. That night, around the fire, Zhen quietly patched Feng's robe with spirit thread. Lan watched the thread work. You moved well. But I didn't strike well, Feng said. Jean, curled beside the flames, flicked her tail. You struck honestly. That counts for something. But not everything, Feng murmured. Lan looked at him. You didn't draw a blade. Was that restraint or hesitation? Both. Silence. Then Lan nodded. Good. You're not ready to draw it yet. Feng looked up. You think there's a blade in this? I think, she said, you're still figuring out what shape your strength takes. He stared at the hilt, and for the first time he realized something. Everyone was watching now. Not the system. Not the forest. People. Peers. Rivals. Elders. Friends. And he couldn't hide behind quiet much longer. He would need to learn how to stand. Even when his voice shook. Even when his wind whispered. The rain came quietly at first. Just a few drops slipping through the canopy, barely audible. But within the hour, it deepened into a steady, unbroken rhythm, soaking moss, bark, robes, and silence alike. By dusk, the group had taken shelter in a half-collapsed grove chamber, what remained of an ancient tree whose core had long since rotted out, leaving behind a hollowed trunk the size of a house. The roots curved up like a cradle, thick enough to block the worst of the downpour. Zhen had built a small fire in the driest corner, fed with spiritwood chips and dried herb stalks. Jean napped in a crook of root overhead. Feng sat near the opening, watching the rain trace slow paths down the bark. Lan sat nearby, sharpening her sword with a worn stone. The rhythm of the rain blended with the rasp of steel. Neither said anything. For a while that was enough. Then Lan spoke. Do you know what the elders called me when I was younger? Feng looked over. No, he said quietly. She didn't look up. They called me the perfect line. He frowned. What does that mean? A sword form is made of lines, she said. Angles, steps, pauses. They said I was the form made real. That I had no wasted movement. No error. She pulled the sharpening stone once more across the blade. They were wrong. Feng waited. Lan set the stone aside. I wasn't perfect. I was just obedient. I copied what they showed me. I didn't think. I didn't question. I just followed. She leaned her sword against the bark and exhaled softly. My family pushed me into sword training before I could even hold one properly. I cried when I first cut myself on the edge. They told me to stop crying. That a blade doesn't weep. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a small strip of cloth, a band of silk, frayed and faded. My mother gave me this when I was 8, she said. Said it was to bind the wrist so the grip would be steady. But really it was to hide the shaking. She turned the cloth over in her hands. I still keep it. Just to remind myself that I was scared once. And that I hid it. Feng said nothing. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because this silence was hers. And she needed to speak into it. I dreamed last night, she said, that I was standing in front of the elders, blade drawn, but no one looked at me. I shouted. I moved. I struck. But I was invisible. The perfect line they drew had erased me. The rain continued, soft and endless. Feng finally spoke. You're not invisible. Lan looked at him, eyes calm but distant. I've been watching you, he said. From the moment we met, you stood exactly where you meant to. Even when no one saw it. That's not obedience. That's intention. She blinked once. He continued. You could have become a shadow of what they wanted. But you didn't. You carved something out instead. He looked at the band in her hand. That cloth doesn't hide weakness. It remembers courage. She looked down at it, silent for a moment. Then to his surprise she smiled. A small, real smile. Faint as moonlight on still water. You're good at saying things when they matter, she said. I think too much. That helps, she said. When words are sharp. Later, after Jin drifted off beside the fire and Jean snored softly above, Feng remained awake. Lan hadn't moved. She sat with her back against the root wall, one hand resting on her blade. Not guarding. Just present. Did you really want to come on this trial? He asked quietly. I volunteered, she said. Why? She tilted her head slightly. To lose. Feng frowned. What do you mean? I wanted to fail something, she said. Not publicly. Not with disgrace. Just privately. I wanted something that pushed back. Something I couldn't control. She paused. This forest doesn't care if I'm perfect. It doesn't reward posture or praise timing. It just is. She looked at him. And that helps. Feng stared at the firelight reflecting on the floor. I came here to find out who I could become. Then we're not that different, Lan said. He looked up. You think so? She nodded. We're both tired of being seen only for what others think we are. Feng exhaled slowly. Then maybe, he said, we should start seeing each other clearly. Lan tilted her head. You're still talking in riddles. He smiled. Bad habit. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since the start of the trial, she slept with her hand off her sword. When dawn came, the rain had stopped. The grove smelled of wet earth and moss. Zhen stirred beside the dying fire, mumbling about stew recipes and flying turtles. Jean stretched on her perch, yawning exaggeratedly. Feng stood and stretched his back. Lan was already awake, but she didn't reach for her blade. She looked out toward the misted path ahead. Ready? She asked. Feng nodded. And this time as they walked side by side into the trees. They did so not as teammates but as something closer to equals. The night didn't feel wrong. That was the worst part. The wind was soft. The fire steady. The canopy above shimmered with spirit dew, and the moss underfoot glowed faintly in places like fallen starlight. Zhen was already asleep, curled beside the campfire with a blanket over his head. Lan sat on watch, silent as always, her blade balanced across her lap. Feng rested against a root wall, holding the hilt in one hand and listening to the rhythm of the forest. Nothing stirred. No warning. Until Jean dropped down from the upper branches, her eyes wide and her fur bristled. Don't move, she whispered. Something's here. Lan stood in a single motion, her sword drawn before her feet touched the ground. Zhen blinked awake. Wah? Jin's ears twitched. It's not a beast. Feng frowned. Then what is it? An echo. Lan froze. Even Zhen stopped moving. Feng looked around, confused. What's an echo? Jean answered softly. A beast born of memory. It mimics the presence of anything it's heard. Voices, breaths, even regrets. Wait, Jean said. It mimics people? Not just people, Jean said. It mimics moments. Lan's eyes scanned the darkness. Where? Jean pointed. Feng followed her gaze. There, just past the edge of the firelight, the trees shifted, slightly, slowly. And then, a voice. Clear. Familiar. Oh. Feng. He turned toward it instinctively. It was his grandfather's voice. You can't keep walking like this. Feng's chest tightened. The voice wasn't a recording. It sounded exactly like it had that day in the ancestral hall. Word for word. You must choose your path, or the forest will choose for you. Feng took a step forward. Lan grabbed his arm. That's not real. It sounds. It's not real, she repeated firmly. Jean clutched his talisman. It's inside our memory fields. It's pulling lines from our minds. Jean hissed. It's hunting for your hesitation. And then another voice emerged. This one near Jean. High-pitched. Breathless. You're not a real alchemist. You're a mistake. Jean turned pale. That was my teacher. From the lower ward. Lan didn't speak, but her eyes flickered as a cold, feminine voice echoed from the mist. You're nothing without the sword. Without it, you're empty. Lan gritted her teeth. That's enough. Then, another voice. A soft one. Feng. It was his own voice. From another life. From that night. The worst one. I'm sorry. I just want to rest. Feng's knees trembled. The forest felt thicker now. The fire dimmer. The air heavier. Jean shouted, It's close. A shape stepped out of the mist. It wasn't monstrous. It looked like a person. A boy about Feng's age wearing robes that shimmered like water. But where a face should be, there was nothing. Only a smooth surface. Like a mirror. And when it moved, it didn't walk. It floated. Silently. Elegantly. It turned its head toward Feng and spoke in his voice. I'm tired of pretending to be strong. Feng backed up. Lan stepped in front of him, blade drawn. Don't listen. But Feng's breath caught. The voice was too real. The face too familiar. It didn't matter that it was blank. It was him. All the doubt. All the weariness. All the things he hadn't said aloud in this new life. It stood before him now. And it knew. The echo moved again. This time toward Lan. Its body shimmered and her form replaced his. It was her now, her stance, her blade, her expression. It said in her voice, You'll always be second to their memory. Lan hesitated. For the first time since they'd entered the forest, she froze. The echo took another step forward. Closer. Jean grabbed a flare talisman and threw it. Light exploded in the mist. The echo hissed, staggering back. Jean shouted, They hate direct light. Keep it lit. Lan snapped out of her trance. Feng, move. But Feng couldn't. He wasn't held by force. He was stuck inside himself. His old voice whispered in his mind. The weakness, the fear, the guilt, the knowledge that even now he was still pretending to belong. Still scared that if he took one wrong step, they'd all see the truth. That he wasn't strong. That he wasn't ready. That maybe he never would be. The hilt in his hand warmed. A pulse. A breath. Not his. Not the forest. Something else. He looked down. The jade spiral shimmered softly. And he heard a whisper, not in the air but deep in his chest. He gripped the hilt with both hands. And breathed. Not perfect. Not powerful. But present. He stepped forward, not away from the echo but toward it. Lan blinked. Feng? The echo froze. It turned back toward him, face blank. And this time he saw it for what it was. Not a reflection of truth, but a parasite, feeding on fear. He raised the hilt. The air around him stirred. He didn't call a blade, didn't swing. He just breathed, and the wind responded. A slow, outward wave, gentle but firm, like a pulse of intent. The echo recoiled. Its form flickered. For one heartbeat it lost shape, and then it shattered, not with a scream, but with silence. It crumbled like mist breaking against stone, and was gone. The firelight brightened again. The trees stopped whispering. The voices faded. Jean dropped to the ground, panting. Lan sheathed her sword slowly. Jean landed beside Feng and stared at him. What did you do? She whispered. I didn't fight it, Feng said. He was still shaking. I just accepted it. Lan looked at him, eyes unreadable. Not many can stand in front of themselves and stay upright. Feng sat down slowly. His hands trembled. But not from fear. From relief. The thing had almost taken him. But not this time. Not in this life. That night no one spoke. Not because of fear. But because something had shifted. Feng had faced himself, and had chosen to stay standing. They found it by following the silence. After the night of the echo beast no one spoke much. Jin remained unusually quiet. Lan moved with more caution. Jean watched the sky more than the ground. Li Feng walked near the back of the group, hand resting on the empty wind hilt at his waist. The path had curved uphill since morning, following a rocky ridge that bent like a spine between two small waterfalls. As the mist thickened again, a strange quiet settled over the forest. Not natural, not magical. Just muted. Like something was listening. Like the world was holding its breath. Lan paused at a break in the moss, where a slope of gray stone peeked out between roots. She touched her fingers to it, brushing off years of dust. It was metal. Carved. Hollow sounding. A step further, and the stone gave way to a clearing, circular, sunken slightly into the earth. At its center stood a tower. Or what remained of one. It was barely 2 stories high. Time had eroded most of it. Roots had cracked the base. A section of its side had collapsed completely. But still, at the very top, hanging from a twisted beam of bronze, a bell remained. Rusted. Silent. Untouched. Jin looked up. A bell tower? Lan nodded slowly. Ancient signaling post, maybe. Some clans used them to call spiritual events. Or to ward off echoes, Jean added. Feng stepped into the clearing. The ground felt strange. Soft like breath. The moment he reached the tower's base, the system activated. System check-in triggered. Location: verdant mystic forest, forgotten bell. Condition met: silent presence in resonant zone. Check-in successful. Reward unlocked: spirit vein sight, temporary ability. Duration: 48 hours. Effect: reveals active spiritual energy flows in terrain, objects, and living forms. Aids in avoiding traps, sensing hidden beasts, and locating cultivator imbalances. A pulse of warmth moved through his chest. He blinked, and the world changed. Not drastically, not violently, but subtly. He looked at the trees, and saw lines, thin, glowing threads of blue and green weaving up their trunks. He turned toward the soil, and saw the roots pulsing faintly like veins carrying blood. He turned to Lawn, and saw her spiritual energy flowing steadily, like wind through an open blade. Jin's energy was more chaotic, loops, curls, unfinished patterns. Jean shimmered with lightning threads even while still. This is new, Feng muttered. What do you see? Lan asked. Everything. They camped in the bell tower that night. It wasn't safe, nothing in the verdant forest ever truly was, but the structure offered shelter, and the clearing had no trace of beast scent. Jin examined the bell with awe. It's old, he said, running a hand along the surface. Bronze core. Engraved with a ritual matrix, but it's been weathered away. Jean sniffed. Good. If it still rang, it might summon something. Like what? She tilted her head. Depends. Could be birds. Could be a forest spirit that thinks it's still time to judge mortals. Jin quickly stepped back. Feng sat near the doorway watching the flow of energy around the stones. Each crack in the tower leaked faint spiritual mist. Nothing dangerous, just old echoes of power, like candlelight in a forgotten hallway. Lan approached and sat beside him. You're quiet, she said. I can see the flow of things, he replied. But I don't know what to do with it yet. You will, she said. What does mine look like? He glanced at her. Sharp, he said. But steady. Your energy doesn't flare or flicker. It listens to you. She considered that. And yours? Feng paused. Still forming, he said. But it's clean. Like the first wind after a storm. She didn't speak again. But she didn't need to. Her silence felt warm, not distant. Later that night, after everyone else had slept, Feng remained awake. The hilt lay in his lap. Its jade spiral pulsed faintly in sync with his breathing. The bell above swayed softly in the breeze but never rang. Jean padded over and curled beside him. You're changing, she said. Is that good? It's inevitable. He looked at her. Have you seen others do what I'm doing? She yawned. Some. But not many. And none exactly like this. Because of the Tao body? Partly. But mostly because you're not trying to be anyone. He frowned. I'm trying to become stronger. That's different from pretending to be strong. She tilted her head toward the hilt. That thing chose you because you didn't force it. That matters. Feng looked up at the bell one more time. Still silent. Still waiting. Then he closed his eyes. And the world kept moving. Lines of energy drifting, shifting. But all in balance. By midday the forest split. Not metaphorically. Literally. The old trail they followed veered into two distinct paths. One curved gently uphill, lined with blue-laced bark trees, the light filtering soft and golden. The other dipped sharply into shadow, thicker mist, coiled roots, and a strange scent that smelled like wet stone and forgotten incense. Lon stopped and studied both. The high path leads around the ridge, she said. Safer but longer. Jeanne looked down the misted path. Shorter route. Lon nodded. 2 hours saved but... Jean spoke from Feng's shoulder, her ears twitching. That mist isn't natural. Could be a sensory field or illusion fog. Maybe both. Jean rubbed his chin. What if I go scout it? You two check the top path. We regroup at the bend after it merges. Feng frowned. Splitting's dangerous. I've got a ward talisman, Jean said, patting his pouch. And you've got that new vision trick. If I get stuck, you'll find me, right? Lon glanced at Feng. Up to you. Feng hesitated. Then nodded. If anything feels wrong, don't force it. Jean grinned. I'm not the forcing type. They split there beneath the three-way cedar. Feng and Lon ascended the left trail while Jean vanished down into the mist. It was only later, 15 minutes into the climb, that Feng felt the first pulse. A tug on his senses. Like a thread had snapped. He stopped mid-step. Lon looked back. What is it? He's off the path. Lon turned immediately. Then we move. They returned fast. Wind steps softened their descent, helping Feng reach the base in a third of the time. The mist had thickened since they left. It pressed against his skin not like fog, but like thought. Lingering. Searching. Jean leapt to the ground. He's inside something. A memory field. Layered. Feng narrowed his eyes and activated spirit vein sight. The world shifted. Lines of light carved themselves into the ground and air, twisting vines of pale green, scattered blue roots, threads of silver that vanished into nothing. And there, at the edge of the dip in the trail, a broken thread pulsed weakly. Jean's path, Feng said. It's been redirected. Then follow it, Lon said. But be careful, Jean added. Fields like this aren't just illusions. They adapt to what you fear. Feng walked into the mist. Slowly. Deliberately. Every step felt heavier than it should. His feet didn't stumble but the space around them shifted. Just slightly. The moss rearranged. The bark tilted. The sound of dripping water echoed out of time. He kept his breath even. He watched the threads. One led left. Then broke. Another curled upward, looped, and ended in the air. He followed the one that flickered. Jean's presence wasn't loud. But it was worried, the kind of energy that loops, spins, chokes itself. Then, he saw him. Jean sat in the hollow of a tree. Eyes open. But seeing nothing. His fingers moved slowly through the air, as if copying a recipe no one else could read. 3 leaves, he mumbled. 1 flame. Stir twice. Add disappointment. Feng stepped closer. Jean whispered, don't touch him. Let the mist break first. Feng closed his eyes. He reached into the line of energy between them. And breathed. Spirit vein sight illuminated Jean's thread, flickering, dim, nearly severed. But not gone. Feng focused. And then he spoke. Jean. No response. He knelt beside him. Your cauldron is cracking. Jean flinched. Your recipe's wrong. Jean blinked once. What? Feng leaned closer. You forgot the root stabilizer. And you're holding the ladle upside down. A slow breath escaped Jean's chest. And then he laughed. Oh, tired. But real. The mist shivered. And cracked. A web of silver split the air like breaking glass. The illusion broke. Color returned. The bark sharpened. Jean slumped forward and caught himself on both hands. I was making soup, he muttered. Then I was arguing with my master. Then I was... Losing yourself, Jean finished. Feng placed a hand on his shoulder. You're back. Jean looked up at him. Thanks, he whispered. When they returned to the main trail, Lon didn't say anything. But she watched Jean a little more closely. And nodded once at Feng when she thought he wasn't looking. That night, around the fire, Jean stirred the actual soup pot with real ingredients and real flames. His hands were steady. You pulled me out, he said. Feng nodded. I saw the threats, he replied. But it was your voice that brought you back. Jean stretched on a warm stone. Most people get stuck in themselves. You used his rhythm to guide him back. Smart. Lan added quietly, and rare. Feng didn't smile. He just looked into the flames. Because for the first time since arriving in this forest, he realized he wasn't just surviving. He was helping others survive too. And that, more than power, felt like purpose. They were too close to the clearing when it happened. Zhen had gone ahead to check the ridge bend. Lan and Feng followed behind at an even pace. The trees had opened into a long glade, the sun filtering through high branches and golden beams. Birds circled lazily above. It felt safe. That should have been the warning. Lan stopped suddenly, hand tightening on her sword. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Feng paused. "What?" No birds. The forest had gone still. And then, without a sound, it struck. A blur from the trees. Green-gray hide. Long fangs. Eyes like polished glass. A vine-back beast, half reptile, half root, native to the deepest forest zones. It moved like ivy in wind, its body shifting in pulses rather than steps. Spirit energy laced its hide in jagged bands. Lan reacted first. She pivoted, sword flashing. Steel met bark flesh with a metallic crack. Feng stepped back, reaching for his hilt. But it was already too late. The beast surged forward, catching Lan in a clash of claws and weight. She twisted to parry, her stance perfect. But something was wrong. Feng saw it before it happened. Her sword met the beast's arm. And shattered. The blade, elegant, balanced, beloved, snapped in half, sparks flying. Lan stumbled backward, wide-eyed. The beast reared up. Feng moved. No hesitation. No thought. Just motion. He stepped between them, holding only the empty wind hilt. The beast roared, jaws open. Feng inhaled. The wind came. Not loud. Not violent. But certain. It curled around his wrist like a ribbon. Gathered along the spiral grip. Built with every breath. And then the blade formed. A line of silver. No metal. No weight. Just wind shaped like a sword. But this time, it stayed. It shimmered, real enough to cast a shadow. He moved. Not like a swordsman. Like a flow. The beast lunged. Feng stepped past it, diagonal, clean. One strike. The blade met its side. There was no blood. No sound. Just a gust. And the beast collapsed. Its spirit core flickered and dimmed. Its breath slowed. It rolled once. Then stilled. Gone. Silence returned. Lan stood frozen, half of her blade still gripped in one hand. Jin arrived, eyes wide. What happened?" Feng turned. The sword in his hand flickered once more, like a mirage. But this time it didn't vanish. It remained. "Oh," whispering. Drawn. Lan stepped forward. Her eyes weren't on the beast. They were on the wind blade. "You called it." Feng looked down at the sword. He didn't answer. Because he didn't have words. Zhen whistled softly. "That's not a fake blade." "No," Jean said from a nearby rock. "It's his." They buried the broken sword beside the ridge. Lan knelt in silence. No tears. Just a long breath. When she stood, she placed a strip of cloth on the hilt, a memory band. Then turned to Feng. "That blade you carry, what will you call it now?" Feng looked at the wind-forged edge. It shimmered with no light. And yet it pulsed like breath. "Second wind," he said. Lan nodded once. "Then let it carry more than your name." That night, they camped in stillness. Zhen prepared a warming stew, though no one said much. Jean rested near the fire, unusually quiet. Lan sat across from Feng. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," she replied. "That's why it matters." Feng looked down at the hilt in his lap. The blade was gone now, vanished once he'd exhaled. But the sense of it remained. Like the wind had accepted him. Like it had become not just power, but trust. Lan added quietly, "That sword was from my mother." Feng looked up. "It was her first forging," she said. "She gave it to me before I entered the inner ward." "I'm sorry." "I'm not," Lan said. "It served its purpose." She looked at him, her voice softer. "And now something new has begun." Later, as the fire faded and the stars returned, Feng sat with Jean at the edge of camp. He turned the hilt over in his hands. It felt real. It was. But I didn't control it. I didn't decide to summon it. "You didn't need to," Jean said. "That's what makes it yours." He looked at her. "Then how do I summon it again?" Jean stretched. "You don't. Not by force." She met his eyes. "You breathe. You remember. You move forward. And when the moment calls for it." She tapped the hilt. It will come. And deep in the forest, far beyond their camp, a low wind stirred the roots of ancient trees. Something had awakened. Something watching. And for the first time, it remembered his name. The ground had changed. It was Zhen who noticed it first, crouching low over a faint crack in the forest floor. "Feel that?" he said, placing his palm flat against the earth. Feng crouched beside him and pressed his own hand down. A pulse. Slow. Like a heartbeat, but fainter, echoing upward from far beneath. Lan stood at the edge of the grove, her eyes on a massive silhouette that rose ahead of them. A tree. But not like the others. Its trunk was wide enough to swallow a house. Its roots burst from the soil like stone bridges, arching and curling. Its bark was cracked and grayed with time. Not dead. Not alive. Simply ancient. Jean, perched quietly on Feng's shoulder, narrowed her eyes. "That's not a tree." Zhen blinked. "Sure looks like one." "It's a gate." Feng stood slowly. "To where?" Jean tilted her head. "Below." The entrance was hidden beneath a tangle of roots. Lan found it by accident, her boot brushing against hollow bark that rang oddly when tapped. They cleared it carefully, peeling away vines and soil until a low arch revealed itself, half-collapsed and buried under time. No formation guarded it. But the air around it hummed. Zhen held up a charmed stone. It flickered once then went dull. "Spirit null zone," he muttered. Jean whispered, "It won't stop us. But it will watch." Feng stepped forward. The roots shifted, just slightly like they'd exhaled. And then the passage opened wider. They descended in silence. The air below was cool and still. Not stale, fresh. As if the tree above breathed gently through the tunnels. The floor became smoother, shaped stone half-eaten by moss. Carvings lined the walls, swirls, arcs, leaf shapes intertwined with spirals. Lan lit a pale flame in her palm, and the chamber ahead revealed itself. A grove buried underground. Vines hung from the ceiling. A pool glowed faintly in the center, filled with water that shimmered silver blue. All around the walls were markings, some faded, some untouched. And at the far end stood a root-bound altar, tangled and coiled like a throne for something long gone. Feng walked to the edge of the pool. Jean said nothing. Zhen sat slowly near the steps, wide-eyed. "This place is sacred." Lan nodded. Old forest cultivators used places like this to commune. Not with spirits. With the world itself. Feng touched the water. And the system answered. System check-in triggered. Location, verdant mystic forest, root heart grove. Condition met, still spirit/aligned rhythm. Check-in successful. Reward unlocked. Forest's whisper, incomplete message. Type, passive echo. Effect, a message tied to the forest's living memory. Only those with a spirit in balance may receive it. Understanding deepens with future growth. His fingers trembled as the water cooled under his touch. Then his vision dimmed. Not blackness. Not blindness. Just stillness. The grove around him vanished. Replaced by wind through leaves. A voice, old but kind, rose in his ears. "There is a path within the breath." He stood in a clearing now. But it wasn't real. Shapes swirled like fog. Trees without trunks, sky without sun, footsteps with no sound. The voice continued. "When the wind listens, it learns. When it flows, it chooses. And when it chooses, it names its own blade." Feng opened his mouth but no sound came. Still the voice replied. "You are not the first. You will not be the last. But you are known." The wind circled him, gentle, cradling. "And that is enough." Then, the grove returned. He gasped, eyes wide. Jean was at his side. Lan stood a few paces away, watching quietly. "You heard something," Jean said. Feng nodded slowly. "A voice. Not from the system. From the forest." Zhen tilted his head. "A message?" "An echo," Feng said. "But it wasn't from the past." Jean looked thoughtful. "Then it saw you." Lan stepped closer. "What did it say?" Feng looked at his hands. "It told me I was known." The chamber fell quiet. Zhen stood and exhaled slowly. "Well, that's comforting and terrifying." Lan looked at the altar again. "Did it give you anything else?" Feng shook his head. "Just a feeling. Like, the wind knew me." They left the grove before sunset. None of them spoke until the light of the upper forest reached them again. Even the birds were quiet. The path ahead felt longer now. Not heavier. But deeper. Like the forest was walking with them. That night, Feng sat apart from the fire. The hilt rested beside him, silent. He didn't summon the blade. He didn't need to. because for the first time since being reborn, he felt like he belonged here. Not as a guest, not as a hidden heir, but as someone the world itself had chosen to watch. They didn't expect it to come back. By now they'd nearly forgotten the first encounter. The skyroot falcon, a spirit beast with bark-hardened wings, talons like spears and a shriek that bent wind. Lon had wounded it days ago. They'd assumed it had fled. They were wrong. It came just before dusk. They were crossing a narrow gorge, the path no wider than a cart's wheel. A stone bridge arched between two cliffs, laced with moss and half-eaten by time. Below, mist rolled like a sleeping ocean. Lon led the way. Zhen walked in the middle, muttering about bridge stability and regretting not reinforcing his boots. Feng followed last, Jean on his shoulder, tail twitching. That's when the wind changed. Not cool. Cold. So. Then, a scream. It pierced the air like a blade through silk. Feng turned. The sky split. The falcon dove. Move. Lan's voice snapped through the air. Zhen froze. The falcon hit the bridge like a crashing star, its talons crushing stone, wings knocking wind from the air. The structure groaned. Cracks split from the impact. Zhen lost his footing. Feng lunged, grabbing his arm, too late. Zhen slipped over the edge. Feng didn't think. He dove. One hand caught Zhen's sleeve. The other gripped the ledge. His feet scraped stone, barely holding. Zhen dangled below, wide-eyed. I hate cliffs, he gasped. Climb? Feng grunted, pulling up. Above them the falcon turned. It wasn't retreating. It was hunting. Lon threw a blade arc at its wing. The falcon dodged midair, wind swirling from its feathers. Jean launched from the ledge, tail glowing with lightning. She struck the beast's side, forcing it to veer, but it didn't stop. Zhen climbed back up with Feng's help. They barely made it to solid ground when the falcon circled again, this time aiming straight for Feng. Remembered him. The wind bent around its form. Li Feng stepped forward and drew the hilt. No hesitation. No thought. The blade came. Second wind shimmered into existence, solid now, stable. The falcon shrieked in dove. Feng moved. He leapt onto the crumbling bridge, wind curling beneath his feet. Wind step, enhanced. The forest answered. His breath aligned. He didn't dodge. He flowed. The falcon's wing clipped the bridge behind him, exploding stone into dust. Feng dashed left, then forward. The bird turned in midair, talons glowing with spiritual force. Feng raised the blade. The falcon struck. Feng parried. Wind and feather clashed. The impact sent him skidding across the bridge. Blood trickled down his lip. Jean shouted, "You can't match its force directly." "I'm not trying to," Feng said. He stood. His arm trembled. The falcon circled again. His vision blurred. But then his chest burned. Not with pain. With pressure. The kind he hadn't felt before. It wasn't the system. It wasn't the forest. It was something inside him. Deep within his meridians, a pulse radiated from his dantian, soft, slow, ancient. Like something asleep was beginning to stir. Feng inhaled. And the air shifted. His breath grew sharper. Lighter. Clear. Jin's eyes widened. Your Dao body. Lan stepped beside him, blade ready. What's happening? Feng stepped forward. The wind bent around his body. The falcon dove again. This time Feng ran toward it. One step. The wind folded beneath his foot. 2 steps. The air wrapped around his form. 3. The falcon reached him. He leapt upward, right into its path. He twisted midair and slashed once. A line of air, silver and still, cut across the falcon's beak. It wasn't a deep wound, but it stopped the beast mid-flight. It reared back, shrieked, and spun away, wings flaring wide. Feng landed on one knee. The hilt dimmed. The blade faded. The falcon didn't strike again. It circled. Wash. Then flew off, wounded. Not defeated, but changed. The wind fell still. The air returned. The bridge groaned under their weight. Lan walked to Feng. You're bleeding. I'm alive, he said. She handed him a cloth. More importantly, you're resonating. Jin helped steady him. That was insane. Jean landed beside them. His Dao body stirred. Just once. But I felt it. Feng clutched his side. I didn't summon anything. It just woke up. Lan nodded. It's listening now. Feng looked down at the hilt. Still warm. Still quiet. But no longer just an artifact. It had answered him because something inside him had called it. And the forest had listened too. That night, they built camp near a stone ridge, under stars clearer than they'd seen in days. No one spoke for a long time. Zhen brewed tea. Lan cleaned her blade. Jean curled near the flame. Feng sat with the hilt beside him. His hand trembled, not from fear but from the weight of awakening. Not all at once. Not yet. But step by step. The Tao body wasn't a gift. Was a path. And he'd just taken the next one. They arrived at the clearing just before sunrise. The air felt heavier here. Not oppressive, sacred. As if the forest itself had paused its breath. The trees circled in perfect symmetry, forming a wide ring where nothing grew, not even moss. The soil was smooth. Not flat but rippling like water made solid. Mist clung low to the ground, and a single stone altar rose in the center, etched with ancient runes that shimmered faintly in the early light. Lan was the first to speak. This is it. Zhen adjusted the strap on his satchel. This is where the exit opens? Jean stepped forward and sniffed the air. Not until the forest says so. Feng looked at the altar. Is it another test? No, Jean replied. It's the same test. Just quieter. They stepped into the circle as a group. The air cooled instantly. A breeze stirred, despite no visible wind. Feng's pulse slowed. Not out of fear but in rhythm. Zhen rubbed his arms. Feels like I'm being watched. You are, Lan said. By what? By everything. An old voice rose. Not spoken. Not heard. Just felt. Step forward. One by one. Feng blinked. The voice wasn't the system. And it wasn't the forest exactly. It was something older. The will behind the mist. Lan stepped forward first. The wind thickened around her. A silence deeper than silence settled. She stood still. One breath. Then she bowed once, to the altar, to the air, to herself. The wind accepted her. The mist shifted. And she stepped back. No words. No light. Just acknowledgement. Zhen was next. He hesitated. Then walked slowly into the circle's center. The air coiled around him, not rejecting, not accepting. Just watching. Zhen stood awkwardly, then bowed. I know I talk too much. I mess up sometimes. But I try. I really try. The wind held still. Then softened. Zhen exhaled, bowed deeper and stepped back. Jean didn't step forward. She didn't have to. The forest already knew her. She simply sat down at the edge of the clearing and closed her eyes. The mist curled around her like greeting an old friend. Finally, Feng stepped forward. The air shifted again. The moment he passed the edge of the circle, everything stopped. No wind. No sound. Even the mist stood still. He stood alone. And the presence behind the air returned. What do you carry? Feng's chest tightened. He wasn't being asked for strength. He was being asked for truth. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Not because he didn't know. Because he knew too well. He carried fear. Of failure. Of not being enough. Of pretending too long and forgetting who he was. He carried hope. A quiet one. For a life of meaning. Of direction. Of standing without shaking. He carried a name that wasn't feared. A path that wasn't written. And a hilt without a blade. He knelt. Placed the hilt gently at the altar's base. I don't know who I'll become, he whispered. But I'll keep walking. Pause. Then. When. Not sharp. Not soft. But steady. It rose from the ground, swept over him. And vanished. The mist pulled back. The altar shimmered. And a symbol carved itself into the stone where he'd knelt. A spiral of wind. Subtle. Small. But permanent. Feng picked up the hilt again. It hummed once. And grew still. He stepped back. Lan looked at him. He nodded once. No words. But they didn't need them. The mist lifted. The circle brightened. And ahead, where there had been only trees, a gate stood. Simple. Stone. Etched with quiet light. The way home. That night, before they stepped through, the group made one last camp. Zhen cooked rice over a careful fire. Lan cleaned her backup blade. Jean hummed something ancient and low as she watched the stars. Feng sat with his blade in his lap, looking out over the forest one last time. You're ready? Jean said beside him. Not yet. But close. He nodded slowly. The forest didn't judge me, he said. No, Jean replied. It doesn't judge. She looked up at the sky. It remembers. Feng tightened his grip on the hilt. Then I'll give it something worth remembering. The gate opened just after sunrise. No flash of light. No thunder. Just the quiet creak of stone as the forest peeled back its final layer. Mist dissolved. Tree roots shifted. And there, at the far end of the clearing, a stone arch emerged from the earth, Tall, curved, carved with spirals that shimmered faintly with silver. Jin stood first. Is that it? Lon nodded. Trial gate. Jean flicked her tail. Once you pass through, you're no longer part of the forest. It forgets you. Li Feng stared at the arch. He didn't move. Not yet. Behind him, the grove, the altar, and the spiral he'd left behind felt distant already. Like a story whispered in another room. He closed his eyes and stepped forward. They walked together, side by side. Lon, Jin, Feng, Jin. They crossed the threshold without fanfare and were met with silence. The outer camp waited on the other side. Disciples from other trial groups stood in loose formations, some bandaged, some silent, some trying not to stare. A few elders sat beneath the inspection canopy, surrounded by spirit tablets and record scrolls. A single formation master adjusted the final pulse seal as the gate fully opened, then looked up and narrowed his eyes. Feng felt it instantly. The shift. The change. The way the eyes of the camp lingered a second too long. On him. Not on Zhen, who was grinning nervously. Not on Lon, who carried herself like a blade in sheath. Not even on Jean, curled in fox form atop Feng's shoulder. But him. Elder Shu approached, flanked by 2 assistants. He didn't greet them. He simply raised a tablet and said, "Report." Lon stepped forward. 4 survivors. Full trial completion. No casualties. Moderate spirit beast encounters. 1 echo beast. 1 returning skyroot falcon. Shu blinked. It returned? Lon nodded. Wounded. Stronger. Repelled by coordinated action. Shu turned to Feng. And your contribution? Feng stood still. He didn't brag. Didn't shrink. He just said, "I drew my blade." Shu's eyes flicked to the hilt at his side. No sheath. No edge. Just a grip carved with wind. I see. They were led to the waiting platform for debrief. Treated politely. Not warmly. Zhen muttered, "You'd think we brought back a corpse." "No," Jean replied. "You brought back a question." Feng sat apart as the officials murmured among themselves. He couldn't hear every word, but he caught pieces. Formless blade. Resonance pulse registered. A spirit sight variant? The youngest one? Him. Lon sat beside him, calm as always. She didn't speak. Not until the murmurs faded. Then she said, "You were seen in there. Not just by the forest." Feng looked at her. "Does it change anything?" "Everything." The debrief ended before midday. They were released without ceremony. Feng stood at the edge of the platform, staring out over the courtyard where the other disciples had gathered. Some talked. Others packed. A few watched him. Jean Mu wasn't among them. But his name whispered through the ranks like smoke. Lon joined him again, adjusting her cloak. "I'm heading to the inner grounds. They'll want a report." Zhen reappeared beside them, arms full of food packs. "They gave me rations instead of praise. I'll take it." He smiled at Feng. "You going back to the outer courtyard?" "For now." Zhen raised an eyebrow. "Even after what you just did?" Feng nodded. "I'm not done being underestimated." Zhen grinned. "Spoken like a true schemer." He turned to go, then stopped. "Hey, thanks. Back there. In the mist. At the gorge. I owe you." Feng smiled. "Just walk your path." Zhen raised his food packs. "I'll walk it full." Lon lingered. She looked at him, eyes sharper now. "You could step up," she said. "There are tests coming. Promotions. The elders are watching." "I'm not ready," he said honestly. She nodded. "Then get ready." She turned to go. But before she left, she added, "Your wind cuts deeper than you think." Then she was gone. That night, Feng sat beneath the tree outside his quarters. The stars blinked softly above. The hilt rested across his lap. He held it gently. It didn't hum. Didn't shimmer. But it was there. Not a tool. Not a symbol. But a choice. One he made every time he drew breath. Jean patted beside him. "You passed the trial," she said. "But now comes the real one." Feng didn't ask what she meant. He just watched the wind move through the grass. And whispered, "Then I'll keep walking." The outer courtyard looked the same. Same worn flagstones. Same crooked pine tree near the central steps. Same mist curling around the koi pond in the morning, catching sunlight like silver thread. But the silence had changed. Li Feng stepped through the east gate alone. No ceremony greeted him. No elder offered praise. But the stairs lingered. 2 outer disciples paused in their sweeping. One pretended to check a herb chart while watching from the corner of his eye. Another lowered her voice mid-conversation the moment Feng passed. Jean, curled on his shoulder in fox form, muttered, "It begins." Feng said nothing. His quarters were untouched. Simple. Quiet. One window. One mat. A teapot left right where he'd placed it before the trial. He unpacked slowly. Cleaned his blade hilt. Removed his travel robes. By the time he stepped outside again, a folded slip of paper had been slid under the door. No signature. Just a line. "The blade you carry has no scabbard. Be careful where you rest it." Jean arrived that afternoon, arms full of scrolls and fruit. "I come bearing bribes," he said cheerfully, "and minor gossip." Feng raised an eyebrow. Jean sat, legs crossed, and set down a peach. "The elders think you're unstable. The inner court thinks you're interesting. And the outer disciples think you're cursed." Feng blinked. "Cursed?" Jean shrugged. "You walked into the forest unknown and walked out with no injuries and a formless weapon. People assume a deal was made." Jean yawned. "They're not wrong." Feng smiled faintly. "I didn't make a deal. I made a choice." Jean's expression softened. "Then keep walking straight. You'll need that spine." Later, Feng walked alone to the training field. It was mostly empty. But not completely. A group of outer disciples stood in a circle around one sparring pair. One of them was a girl with wind-etched boots. She moved fast, too fast for her rank. Her opponent fell in 3 strikes. Feng turned to leave. Someone called out, "You? Trial boy." He paused. The girl stepped forward, sweat on her brow, but confidence in her stance. "You're the one with the invisible sword, right?" He said nothing. She grinned. "Thought so. My name's Meilin. Don't worry, I'm not here to challenge you." Feng nodded. "All right. I'm here to see if it's real," she said. "The blade. The wind. The rumors. And if it's not?" She shrugged. "Then I guess we all go back to thinking you're weird." Jean whispered, "She's not mocking. She's measuring." Feng stepped forward. "I don't show it for show," he said. She raised her hands. "No need. Just wanted to see your eyes." Feng blinked. "My eyes?" She nodded. "People who come back from the verdant forest always change. Yours haven't hardened. Not like the others. But they've deepened." She bowed. Then walked away. Feng stood in the quiet field long after she left. That night, as moonlight filtered through the paper window of his room, Feng sat alone with his hilt. No blade appeared. But the wind stirred. And he could feel it, not waiting to be used. Waiting to be understood. It came with the morning tea. An old man, hunched, eyes clouded but alert, shuffled into Li Feng's courtyard just after sunrise. He didn't speak, didn't bow. He simply placed a small, cloth-wrapped bundle beside the teapot on the stone table, then turned to go. Feng looked up. "Who sent this?" The man paused. "Your mother," he said. Then left without another word. Feng stared after him until the rustling of leaves swallowed his figure. Jean, still half asleep in fox form, peeked open one eye. That was dramatic. Feng sat slowly. I've never met him before. Then he was important. The bundle was small. Wrapped in faded silk, tied with a single red thread. No seal. No emblem. Just age. Worn at the corners but carefully folded. Feng untied the thread with steady hands. Inside, a wooden box, simple, dark, polished with care. The kind used for scrolls, heirlooms, or final things. He lifted the lid. A letter sat atop a folded strip of deep violet cloth. The paper was old but intact. The handwriting, precise, elegant, flowing like watered-down stone. He recognized it immediately. His mother's. Feng. If you are reading this, it means the wind has started to listen. I was not born in the Azure Sky clan. I was chosen. And when I was tested, they said I had a heart too quiet for power. They were wrong. I didn't crave power. I craved stillness. And I found it in the wind. You may too. But your path won't be mine. You will be seen. Not for what you hold, but for how long you keep walking. When you are ready, speak this name aloud, not for others. For yourself. It will not unlock power. But it will open the first door. Her name was Shenlian. Mother. Feng sat still for a long time. Jean said nothing. Even the wind through the courtyard held its breath. Shenlian, he said aloud. Softly. Not as a call. As a reminder. And in that moment the wind shifted. A breeze curled around his fingers. Warm. Steady. Like a hand placed gently over his own. Beneath the letter, wrapped in the violet cloth, lay a single item. A pendant. Circular. etched with a spiral of lines that resembled wind in motion. Jade but not flawless. There was a small crack near the center, long healed. Feng held it in both hands. The jade felt cool but not lifeless. It hummed faintly. A whisper. Not a word. Just recognition. Jin arrived later that day with a bag of buns and 3 scrolls tucked under one arm. I brought snacks and side quests, he announced. Then stopped. Feng sat on the courtyard step, the pendant in his lap. Jin blinked. Did I miss something important? Feng looked up. I got a letter. Jin lowered his voice. From? Feng nodded. My mother. Jean, lying in the sun, cracked one eye. She gave him a name. Jin sat down slowly. A person's name? Feng shook his head. A sword's. Jin looked between them. Should I be worried? Yes, Jean said. No, Feng added. Jin scratched his head. Comforting. That night, Feng tied the pendant around his neck. He didn't channel energy into it. Didn't try to activate anything. He just wore it. And as he meditated, the breeze in the room began to circle differently. Slower. Wider. As if drawn to listen. The hilt at his side pulsed once in quiet agreement. And the spiral etched into his mother's jade seemed to glow just slightly in the moonlight. The next morning, Feng woke early. He sat on the step and drank his tea. The pendant rested against his chest. Jean curled beside him, unusually quiet. You feel it, don't you? She said. Feng nodded. Like something old, turned its head. Jean looked at the sky. That name, Xinlian, it matters. You won't know how yet. But it wasn't just a sword. Feng didn't speak. He just breathed. And the wind bent gently toward him. The message came with no explanation. Just a single sentence from the pavilion steward. Disciple Lan has been summoned to the inner grounds. She will not return this season. No warning. No note. Feng read it twice. Then set it down. Zhen, leaning on the window frame, frowned. That's it. Feng nodded. That's all they said. Jean leapt onto the table and narrowed her eyes. It's not punishment. The inner grounds don't summon lightly. They're watching her now. Zhen scratched the back of his neck. Makes sense. She's strong. Precise. She doesn't make mistakes. He looked at Feng. You okay? I wasn't expecting it. Feng's voice was even, but his fingers lingered a little too long on the edge of the message scroll. The days shifted subtly after that. Lan hadn't been talkative. She didn't linger or joke or even share much more than a few words at a time. But she was present. And now she wasn't. Feng still rose before dawn. Still trained. Still walked the quiet stone paths of the outer courtyard. But there was a space beside him now. Unspoken. At the training field, the students were louder than before. A new wave of disciples had returned from minor missions, and they treated sparring like performance. Blade techniques glimmered. Chi clashed in arcs of gold and blue. Feng watched from the shade of the pavilion wall, arms crossed. One match ended in dramatic shouts and cheers. 2 disciples turned his way. One of them, a tall boy with storm-colored robes, raised his chin slightly. You don't spar anymore? Feng looked at him. No. The boy's lips curled. You've already passed the forest trial. Afraid of embarrassing us now? Feng stepped forward calmly. I've already been tested. This isn't a test. The other boy muttered something, but the tall one raised a hand. Let him be. They walked off. Jean, perched on the post behind Feng, muttered, It begins again. At night, Feng returned to his courtyard. He set the pendant on the table beside the hilt. The wind in the room was still. Not quiet. Just waiting. He missed Lan's presence, not because she guided him, but because she understood silence. She didn't need to speak to say, I see you. You're not invisible. Now, even surrounded by disciples, Feng felt something unfamiliar. Alone. Not unwanted. But unmoored. He trained later that night. Alone in the shadowed edge of the courtyard. Second wind flickered to life more easily now. The blade wasn't loud. It didn't spark or roar. But it moved when he breathed. And tonight, it moved smoother. More stable. His steps sharpened. His dashes shortened and deepened. The spirit pressure beneath his feet didn't flare. Slid. He turned once mid-step, and the air curved with him. Jean watched from the roof. You're not forging power, she said. You're becoming shape. Feng didn't answer. He just kept moving. After training, he sat beneath the courtyard's pine tree. The moon hung low, casting pale light through the leaves. Jean joined him. Missing her? She asked. He nodded once. She never asked anything from me, he said. But when she watched me, I tried harder. Not because she expected it. Just because she was there. Jean curled her tail around her paws. She'll come back. But changed. Like you, she said. He looked up at the stars. Maybe, he said, we'll meet again at a bend in the wind. The next morning he returned to the training field. Same chaos. Same noise. But this time he didn't just pass through. He stepped onto the old sparring ring near the north wall. Alone. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't issue a challenge. He just stood there, breathing. And after a while the noise dulled. One by one eyes turned his way. Some curious. Some suspicious. Some cautious. Feng didn't draw his blade. He simply held the hilt. And waited. Jean watched from above. And whispered, they'll see you. Not all will like it. But they'll see you now. Feng first noticed the scent of sandalwood. Not strong. Just faint, carried on the breeze as he walked the outer courtyard path toward the tea platform beneath the bamboo grove. By the time he reached the edge of the steps, Jinmu was already there. Seated comfortably, one leg crossed, sleeves loose, a pot of steaming tea between them. His long dark hair was tied with a red cord, and his expression was relaxed. Not smug. Not aggressive. Just watching. Li Feng, Jinmu said with a smile, you're earlier than I expected. Feng didn't stop walking. Not here to spar? No, Jinmu said, pouring 2 cups. Here to talk. Feng sat across from him, the table between them. He didn't touch the tea. Jinmu didn't mind. The courtyard is restless these days, he said. Everyone's either watching you or whispering about you. I know. That doesn't bother you? Feng's voice was calm. Wind passes. So do whispers. Jinmu chuckled. You've grown bold. No, Feng replied. Just quiet enough to hear things clearly now. They drank in silence for a moment. The breeze stirred through the bamboo. Feng finally reached for the cup. It was warm, lightly spiced, exactly how Jinmu used to drink it during the clan's spring tournaments. Familiarity. False comfort. Jinmu's tone stayed light. You know, I've always liked wind cultivators. Feng raised an eyebrow. They're clever, Jinmu said. They don't hit first. They observe. Wait for their opponent to exhaust themselves. Feng sipped. But the real strength, Jinmu continued, is that when they strike, it's never from the front. Feng set the cup down. You're not here to compliment my technique. No, Jinmu said. I'm here to remind you that you've stepped into a story you weren't meant to be part of. Then why am I in it? Jinmu leaned forward slightly, his smile still soft. Because someone turned the page too early. A silence hung between them. Then Feng said, you're not warning me. You're measuring me. Of course, Jinmu replied. Only fools strike what they don't understand. You don't understand me yet. Jinmu tilted his head. No. But I'm starting to. And that worries me. Jin stirred beside Feng. He means it. Feng kept his gaze steady. Are you going to try again? To duel? Jinmu shook his head. No. I already saw what I needed. He tapped the table gently. You don't react the way outer disciples usually do. You don't beg. You don't posture. That makes you difficult to push. Then stop trying. Jinmu's smile didn't fade. But that's what I enjoy. He stood slowly and straightened his robe. Before he left, he turned back toward Feng. The clan has rooms no one speaks in. Corridors no one walks after dusk. You've entered one of those paths, whether you realize it or not. I don't plan to leave it. I hope you don't, Jinmu said. And then, without another word, he vanished into the bamboo. Jin exhaled softly. He doesn't hate you. I know. But he's thinking 2 years ahead. Jin flicked her tail. That's dangerous. Feng looked down at the hilt resting in his lap. Then I'll train 4 years ahead. Later that afternoon, Feng returned to the west courtyard, one of the quietest corners of the outer grounds. He began his breathing drills. Inhale. Wind gathers. Exhale. Wind parts. He stepped forward. The hilt pulsed once. The blade formed. He moved again. This time the air followed, natural, seamless. Even when the blade vanished, the rhythm stayed. Jin watched from a nearby stone. Do you regret meeting him like that? No. Why not? Feng stopped and looked at the sky. Because he thinks he's watching the wind. He turned back toward the post where Jin sat. But he doesn't realize the wind is watching back. The message came with the morning dew. Not a letter. Not an announcement. Just a red-threaded token placed outside his courtyard door. Etched on its face was a single character, Wui. Li Feng stared at it for a moment. Jean, lying across the edge of the table, flicked an ear. Didn't think he'd call for you this soon. Feng sat down, the token in his palm. Who is he? Elder Wui, she said, isn't just an elder. He's the last remnant of the old Wind Hall, the one that trained your mother. Feng looked up. He knew her? Jin's eyes narrowed. They trained together before she rose. Some say they challenged each other every third moon. Some say they didn't speak for a decade. But they respected each other. Is he dangerous? He's quiet, Jean said. That's more dangerous than most. The Wind Hall wasn't part of the main courtyard. It was set far to the east, beyond the bamboo walls, nestled near the cliffs where the outer walls overlooked the valley. It had no students. No servants. No banners. Just wind whistling softly between its pillars. Feng approached the gate. It was open. No one stood to greet him. He stepped inside. The courtyard beyond was layered in falling leaves. Dry pine needles rustled underfoot. The air felt thinner here, sharper. Each breeze moved with precision as if guided by invisible hands. An old man stood in the center, facing away. He wore simple robes. White with green cuffs. His long gray hair was tied with a silk cord, and he stood with both hands resting on the hilt of a wooden practice blade. He didn't turn as Feng approached. You stepped too heavily, Elder Wui said. Feng stopped. You knew I was coming. I knew someone would come, Wui replied. Only took 17 years. Feng bowed. Elder Wui. You're Xin Lian's son. Yes. Silence. Then Wui turned slightly. His eyes were narrow, not cruel, but sharp like carved glass. Sit. Feng obeyed. They sat beneath a pine tree, overlooking a set of stone tiles scarred by hundreds, maybe thousands, of footwork strikes. Wui said nothing for a long time. Feng didn't rush him. Finally the elder said, she taught wind without using words. Feng nodded. I've heard that. She moved like breath, Wui said. Not because she trained harder. Because she listened. To what? To stillness. He looked at Feng. You haven't learned that yet. Feng didn't argue. But you could, Wui said. The hilt you carry, what does it want? Feng hesitated. It doesn't want to fight. Good, Wui said. Neither do I. The lesson began without declaration. Wui stood and walked onto the training stones. Draw your blade. Feng obeyed. Second wind flickered into shape. Wui studied it. Hold it tighter. Feng tightened his grip. Now too loose. Feng lightened it. Wui stepped forward. And struck. Not hard. Not fast. But direct. Feng deflected it by instinct. Wui circled. Struck again. Then again. He said nothing. Just moved. Feng countered each one, not with strength but flow. And with each exchange the wind curled tighter around their forms. Not loud. Not obvious. But present. Finally Wui stepped back. You're not your mother, he said. Feng waited. But you breathe like her. The lesson ended at sunset. Wui offered no formal praise. Just a nod. You'll return tomorrow. I will, Feng said. Wui turned away. Then paused. She would have walked barefoot to find this courtyard again, he said. But now the wind has brought you instead. He stepped into the shadows of the hall. And was gone. Back at his own courtyard, Feng sat beneath the pine tree. Jean curled beside him, tail flicking. He didn't test your skill, she said. I know. He tested your stillness. Feng looked up at the sky. I think he wanted to see if I knew when not to move. Jean smiled faintly. And? I'm still learning. That night, the wind whispered more softly through the branches. Not stronger. Just closer. The next morning, Feng returned to the wind hall. No one greeted him. The gate remained open just as before. Leaves moved along the ground in tight spirals, tracing quiet patterns across the worn training stones. Inside, Elder Wui sat cross-legged in the center of the courtyard. His eyes were closed. He wasn't meditating. He was listening. Feng waited without speaking. After a long silence, Wui said, Do you hear it? Feng closed his eyes. The wind moved through the pillars with a soft hum. Bamboo, Feng said. Wui shook his head. Not the wind through it. The silence it leaves behind. Feng listened again. And then, he heard it. The absence after sound. The shape made by what had passed. Like a shadow in air. Wui opened his eyes. Good. Now let's begin. The first lesson didn't involve weapons. Or movement. Or chi. Wu walked to the edge of the courtyard and gestured to a circle of stones. Step inside, he said. Feng obeyed. Now, Wu said, breathe, and wait. Wait for what? For nothing. Feng stood in the circle for an hour. Then 2. The sun rose above the east pavilion. A bird landed near the hall's roof. A breeze passed through the trees, and nothing happened. Still he waited. Still Wu watched. By the 3rd hour Feng spoke. This is a test? No, Wu replied. This is cultivation. Feng frowned. I'm not doing anything. Wu nodded. Exactly. By sunset Feng's shoulders ached. His legs were heavy. But his mind was still. Not sharp. Not focused. Just quiet. Wu walked over and handed him a cup of water. Tomorrow, he said, you'll do the same thing. Feng took the cup. But why? Because power cannot fill a cup already full, Wu replied. You want to wield the wind. Then you must become the space it moves through. That night Feng didn't train. He simply sat. Not meditating. Not cultivating. Just breathing. The pendant around his neck pulsed faintly in rhythm with his breath. And the hilt beside him felt lighter. Not because it was empty, but because he was. The next day he returned. Same circle. Same stillness. Same silence. But this time, something changed. The wind didn't avoid him. It curved. Softly. Subtly. As if it was testing the shape of his stillness. He didn't move. He didn't speak. And it passed through him. Clean. Quiet. Accepted. Wu approached after sunset. You felt it, he said. Feng nodded. Only for a moment. Moments are all the wind needs. Wu gestured toward the training stones. Draw your blade. Feng stepped forward, exhaled, and pulled the hilt from his side. The blade formed. Second wind shimmered into shape, clear, silent, steady. He moved once, then again. Each motion smoother than the last. The air didn't push back. It guided. He stopped, panting lightly. Wu said, it's not about commanding the wind. It's about letting it choose to carry you. After training, Feng sat beneath the pine tree sipping water. Jean joined him, unusually quiet. She watched him for a while. Then said, you're changing. Feng nodded. I don't feel faster, he said. Or stronger. No, Jean replied. You feel emptier. He looked down at his hands. I thought cultivation was about growing stronger. It is, she said. But real strength isn't addition. It's refinement. Feng leaned back against the tree. Then I still have a long way to go. Jean smiled faintly. That's the point. Later that night, as Feng lay in bed, the pendant around his neck pulsed again. But this time, it wasn't just warmth. It carried a sensation. A memory not his own. A quiet voice once heard long ago. Let the wind pass through you. Only then will it know you are real. He opened his eyes. And smiled. It began with a glance. The first time Li Feng noticed him, it was at the edge of the training field. A tall, slender disciple in clean robes, arms behind his back, posture perfect. He wasn't sparring. Wasn't teaching. Just watching. Feng didn't think much of it. At first. But over the next 5 days the pattern repeated. No matter where Feng went, whether it was the north courtyard for wind drills, the outer cliffs for silent step training, or even the echo wall garden, he was there. Always just far enough not to interrupt. Always standing. Always watching. Jean noticed it first. She dropped onto his shoulder one afternoon and whispered, he's not a spy. Feng turned his head slightly. Then what is he? Jean flicked her tail. A question mark. One wearing robes. Feng finally approached him on the 6th day. The disciple stood near a white cherry tree at the edge of the east pavilion, where old wind scrolls were sometimes aired to dry. Feng stopped a few paces away. Have we met? The disciple bowed politely. No. But I've observed your rhythm. Feng blinked. My what? Your presence, the man clarified. In wind. In silence. In stillness. It is unusual. Feng narrowed his eyes. That's not a common compliment. It's not a compliment, the man said. It's a statement. Feng studied him. His voice was calm. Unhurried. Not mocking, not admiring. Just curious. Feng asked, what's your name? Leong, the disciple replied. Outer Hall, Pavilion 3. I observe flow-based cultivators. Why? Because flow hides truth, Leong said. And I study truth. Jean from a nearby branch muttered, I don't trust people who talk like puzzle boxes. Feng stayed quiet. Then said, if you want something, say it. Leong bowed again. Then I request 1 hour of your time. No sparring. No test. Just walking. Feng blinked. Walking. I believe there are people watching you. More than you realize. If you walk with me, I'll show you where their footsteps fall. They walked that evening. Not in the open courtyards but along the outer rings, the winding stone paths between storage halls and forgotten wells, places no one visited unless they needed to pass unnoticed. Leong walked with his hands behind his back, never rushing. At first it was silent. Then he pointed. There, he said softly, nodding to a thin strip of disturbed dust beside an old offering statue. Footfall from a runner. This morning. Feng glanced at it. So, that runner is one of the Jade Scroll attendants. She shouldn't be in this quadrant. Feng waited. Leong pointed again. Here. Hairline fracture in the stone near the arch. No. Sword sheath edge less than a day old. No registered duels today. Feng said, You think someone is tailing me? Leong stopped. I think someone is marking your rhythm. They reached a small archway near the southeast fountain. Leong turned to face him fully. Your emergence has disrupted a balance. Too early. Too quietly. Feng said, I didn't ask for attention. I know, Leong replied. That's why it's dangerous. The wind stirred through the trees above. Feng watched Liang's face for a long moment, then said, Why tell me this? Liang's voice dropped. Because I watch the flow of this sect. And when it breaks, so do people. He stepped back, folded his hands again. One day someone will reach for your silence like it's a sword hilt. When that happens, know who you're facing. Then he bowed. And vanished into the shadows of the garden path. Back at his courtyard, Jean paced the railing. Well, she said, that was either a warning, an offer, or a setup. Maybe all three, Feng said. He sat down beneath the pine tree, the hilt of second wind resting across his knees. He knew too much, Jean said. And yet, Feng replied, he didn't strike. Jean stared at him. Do you trust him? No, Feng said. But I remember him. He looked up at the stars. They think I'm unpredictable because I don't speak much. He closed his eyes. But silence is also a memory. And I listen well. They arrived without fanfare. 4 disciples, clad in pale silver robes stitched with golden thread, each wearing a circular mirror pendant at their collarbone. Their movements were quiet, respectful, but unmistakably deliberate, like walking reflections of one another. The Golden Mirror sect had not visited the Azure Sky clan in over 6 years. This time they came for cultural exchange. Everyone knew what that meant. Observation, assessment, recruitment. Li Feng heard the whispers as early as dawn. Zhen passed by his courtyard just after breakfast, breathless and wide-eyed. They're already in the North Hall, he said. 2 of them are reading pulse patterns. One looked directly at an elder and said he hadn't slept in 4 nights. The elder turned white. Jean snorted from the roof. Mirror cultivators see more than they should. Feng nodded. And say less than they need. By midday, the sect's observers began walking the outer grounds. They watched forms, breathwork, spirit release drills. When they reached the wind technique field, Feng was practicing slow-foot drills beneath the pine shadows. He didn't stop when they approached. The others did. All eyes turned to him as a figure in silver stepped forward. He was younger than expected, only a year or 2 older than Feng. His hair was tied in a single twist behind his back. His mirror pendant shimmered with faint blue light, catching the breeze like a still pool. He didn't bow, didn't speak, just watched. Feng exhaled slowly and lowered his stance. The wind moved through the trees. The air quieted. The mirror disciple finally spoke. You're not shaped by your own choices yet. Feng paused. What do you see? The boy's voice was quiet but firm. 3 paths. 1 shadow. No edge. Jean whispered in Feng's ear. That's a reading. Feng replied calmly, I didn't ask for one. The boy nodded. But you needed it. He stepped closer, holding out a folded slip of golden-edged paper. Tonight. Second courtyard near the reflecting pool. Then he turned and left without another word. That night Feng went. Not because he trusted the invitation, but because he needed to know what the boy had seen. The second courtyard was quiet. Moonlight shimmered across the reflecting pool, and the only sound was the slow ripple of water. The boy stood near the edge, his hands behind his back. You came. Feng nodded. You still haven't told me your name. The boy replied, Luo Han. Then gestured to the water. Look. Feng stepped forward. At first he saw only his reflection. Then, It shifted. Not a trick of light. Not illusion. Something else. The pool showed 3 versions of him. One stood on a throne of wind, eyes distant, blade gleaming. Another stood alone in a storm, back turned to the world. The third lay still beneath a shattered pine, hand outstretched toward the sky. Feng said nothing. Luohan finally spoke. Most people reflect what they are. You reflect what you might become. Feng asked quietly, and the shadow? Luohan looked at him. There's something buried. Not under your name. Under your path. Feng frowned. What does that mean? I don't know yet. Luohan stepped back. But the forest remembers you. And so does something else. He turned to leave. Your blade has not chosen a shape. But it will. When it does, be sure you're the one holding it, and not the other way around. Back at his courtyard, Feng sat beneath the pine tree in silence. Jean watched him carefully. Well? Feng said nothing at first. Then, he saw my future. Did you? Feng looked at the hilt resting across his knees. Not clearly. Just the wind blowing past. Jean tilted her head. Then follow it. But don't lose your footing. Feng closed his eyes. And listened. The wind didn't warn him. It waited. It was the 3rd time Zhen failed his promotion exam. He didn't say anything afterward, just smiled, bowed to the outer hall elder, and left with his usual half-joking wave. Most didn't notice. But Feng did. That evening the sky burned gold over the west cliffs. The wind was warm and the pine trees whispered low. Feng found Zhen sitting near the old lantern post, his legs stretched out, a satchel of steamed buns beside him. He was staring at nothing in particular. Just breathing. Jean sat beside Feng without a word. Feng sat down quietly. Zhen offered a bun without looking. Feng took it. They sat like that for a while, sun dropping, silence growing longer between them. Then Zhen said, You ever get tired of pretending it's fine? Feng glanced at him. You pretend? Zhen laughed softly. I never shut up. That's the same thing. The breeze curled around the old lantern post. Zhen leaned his head back and looked at the sky. You want to know why I'm still here? He asked. Feng didn't answer. Because he knew the question was real. Zhen nodded slowly. I could have passed the promotion trials a year ago. Maybe 2. I thought so, Feng said. Zhen turned to him, eyebrows raised. Really? You hide it badly. Zhen smiled. But his eyes were tired. It's my sister, he said. Feng blinked. Your sister? She's sick, Zhen said. Spirit rot in the lower meridians. Stable but not good. She needs medicine from the main hall. Not cheap. Outer disciples get a stipend. Inner ones lose it. Feng stared at him. Zhen shrugged. I'm not stuck. I'm placed. Here. Where I can help her. Feng said, You've been holding yourself back. Zhen didn't reply right away. Then he said, Every time I step into that circle I think, if I win I lose her. And somehow that makes it easy to lose. He laughed again. It's not noble. I'm not sacrificing myself to save her. I'm just afraid if I leave this level I can't go back. Feng didn't say anything. He just listened. Zhen looked down at his hands. She used to train with me, he said softly. We were going to apply to the twin formation program together. But then the illness hit. I kept climbing. She couldn't. He closed his eyes. And I didn't want to climb without her. The wind shifted. Jean sat up and looked at Feng. He said quietly, Why didn't you tell me? Zhen smiled. Because you were too quiet. You looked like you had a secret so big, it needed space around it. Feng turned toward him. You're allowed to want things for yourself too. Zhen shook his head. Yeah, maybe. Someday. He stood up and brushed off his robes. But not today. Feng stood with him. Then I'll help. Zhen blinked. How? I don't know yet, Feng said. But if we're walking the same road, I won't let you stay behind alone. Zhen's grin returned, real this time. You're getting better at saying the right thing, you know that? Bad habit, Feng said. Jean smirked. Good habit, she corrected. That night, Feng sat beneath the pine tree again. But this time his silence was different. Not lonely. Anchored. Zhen's footsteps padded past the edge of the courtyard, whistling off-key. Jean curled beside him and whispered, He's stronger than he lets on. I know. And now? Feng looked down at the hilt resting in his lap. And said quietly, Now I carry something for him too. The wind shifted the old door open with a gentle creak. It wasn't locked. Just forgotten. Tucked behind the east-facing alcove of the Wind Hall courtyard, Past the overgrown ferns and the crooked incense post, stood a structure most disciples walked past without noticing. A half-buried shrine. Feng had never seen it marked on any training maps. Even Zhen hadn't mentioned it. But today something drew him there. Maybe the wind. Maybe instinct. Or maybe something deeper. Jean landed beside him as he approached the entrance. "I didn't know this place still existed," she said. "You've been here before?" "A long time ago," she said softly. "Before your mother left the outer halls." Feng ran his fingers along the carved lintel. The symbols were wind-worn but still legible, an old Cultivation poem about stillness and reflection. They stepped inside. The room was small, circular, and quiet. Stone tiles lined the floor, broken in places but carefully swept. The walls curved in smooth arcs. No windows, only slits in the upper stone where the wind hummed softly. At the far end stood a polished slab of dark crystal, nearly as tall as a person. Jean whispered, "The spirit echo wall." Feng turned to her. "It was a reflection tool," she said, "used by quiet path cultivators. You place your palm on the stone and it shows, not who you are but what you could become." Feng stepped toward it slowly. "Not everyone sees the same thing," Jean added. "Sometimes it shows future forms. Sometimes regrets. Sometimes, nothing." He stood before the crystal and placed his hand against it. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the air changed. No wind. No sound. Just wait. The crystal began to shimmer. Not brightly, like the faint surface of still water before dawn. And then the reflections began to form. The first was familiar. A silhouette dressed in simple robes, hair tied back, hilt at his side. Wind curved around his figure, not violent, not loud. Just flowing. He stood beneath a tree, speaking to students, his presence calm and centered. Not a master, but a guide. Feng felt warmth in his chest. The second form rose beside it, slightly taller. Armor now lined the arms. The blade at the hip shimmered with visible light. This version stood atop a stone platform, surrounded by rival sect banners. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't calm. He was feared. Even the wind coiled away from his steps. Jin's voice was faint. "That is power but not peace." Feng exhaled. The third form rose last, and it made him still. It wore no robes, no armor, no face, just the outline of a person surrounded by mist. Wind howled around it, not following, not embracing. Trap. The figure held no blade. And yet, Feng knew it had killed many. It stood alone, unmoving, as if even the forest had abandoned it. The room dimmed. The image began to flicker, then fade. Feng pulled his hand away. The air returned. The room steadied. Jean didn't speak. Neither did he. For a long while. Then, "Is that really what I could become?" Jean nodded once. "Each one of those is a door. Not a destiny." Feng sat down on the cold stone floor, breathing quietly. "I thought the wind would always carry me." "It will," Jean said. "But wind only follows those who walk." He looked up. "Then I have to choose carefully." "You will," she said. "Because next time," Feng said quietly, "I want the reflection to smile." Back in his courtyard, night fell slowly. Feng sat beneath the pine tree, the hilt across his knees, the pendant warm at his chest. He thought of the three forms. The guide. The warrior. The shadow. He didn't fear them. But he would not ignore them either. They were all parts of the wind. And now the wind had shown him what might lie ahead. It was his step that would decide the path.